You know that moment when you realize your entire family has been underestimating you for your whole life. I was sitting at Thanksgiving dinner when my mother stood up, pointed directly at me, and announced to everyone, "You ruined this family." The room erupted in laughter. My sister, her boyfriend Dylan, even distant relatives I barely knew. I sat there humiliated, invisible, just like I'd been for 35 years. Then Dylan leaned forward with this smug grin and asked, "So, what exactly do you do for a living?" He expected me to stammer, to shrink, to prove my mother right. Instead, I smiled. The room went dead silent. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 2 weeks, everyone in that room was about to discover exactly who I really was. My sister's perfect fiancé. He was hiding something that would destroy her. My golden child sister. Drowning in secrets she'd never told our mother. And me, I was about to flip their entire world upside down. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. And trust me, the people who laughed that night, they're not laughing anymore. My name is Vanessa Coleman. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years building a career in project management, the kind of work that requires precision, patience, and the ability to keep everything running smoothly, even when chaos threatens to tear it all apart. I suppose those skills came naturally to me, learned early in a family where I'd always been the one expected to hold things together. The highway stretched endlessly before me as I gripped the steering wheel, watching the autumn sun sink lower on the horizon. 4 hours. That's how long it took to drive from my apartment in the city back to the house where I grew up. 4 hours to brace myself for Thanksgiving dinner. 4 hours to rehearse the smile I'd wear when my mother inevitably compared me to Emily. And 4 hours to remind myself that this year I wouldn't let their words burrow quite so deep under my skin. The gifts I'd carefully selected sat wrapped in the back seat, each one chosen with thought and care. For Dad, a vintage pocket watch I'd found at an estate sale after searching for weeks. He used to collect them before Mum convinced him to sell his entire collection to help pay for Emily's semester in Paris. I remembered how his hands had trembled slightly as he'd boxed them up, but he'd smiled and said it was worth it for his baby girl's dreams. For Emily, that designer handbag she'd mentioned wanting 3 months ago during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. For Mum, an elegant bouquet from the best florist in the city, the kind of arrangement she always admired but never bought for herself. I'd spent more than I probably should have, but I wanted them to know I'd been thinking of them, that I still cared despite everything. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever my younger sister needed could wait until I pulled into the driveway. I'd just survived the most grueling work week of my career, racing to finalise critical presentations and coordinate between 3 different departments on a project that represented millions of dollars for our company. My eyes felt gritty from too many late nights staring at spreadsheets and timelines. My shoulders ached from hunching over my laptop, surviving on coffee and determination. But I'd finished it. I always finished what I started. As the miles disappeared behind me, my mind drifted back to my college graduation, the way memories do when you're driving alone with nothing but time and old wounds for company. I could still see myself standing on that stage in my cap and gown, heart pounding as they announced my name for the honours diploma. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for that moment, sacrificed sleep, friendships, any semblance of a social life. When the dean called my name with those special words, graduating with highest honours, I'd scanned the audience desperately for Mum's face, hungry for her proud smile. But she wasn't watching me. She was crouched in the aisle with her camera completely focused on Emily, who was 16 at the time, and had come along only because she had complained about being bored at home. I watched Mum fuss over Emily's hair, adjust the pendant around her neck, make sure every angle was perfect. By the time she finally glanced toward the stage, I was already walking away, diploma in hand, my moment of triumph, invisible to the person whose recognition I craved most. "Did you get it?" I'd asked afterward, trying to sound casual, like my heart wasn't breaking. Get what, sweetheart? The ceremony, when they announced my honours distinction? She'd looked genuinely confused. Oh, that was already happening. I was capturing the most beautiful shots of your sister. You know how the camera loves her. But I'm sure you looked wonderful too, dear. The memory still stung all these years later. Maybe that's why when I got my first major promotion 3 years ago, I'd called home the moment I left my boss's office. I'd been the youngest person in my department's history to reach senior project coordinator. My supervisor had praised my strategic vision, my ability to lead teams through impossible deadlines, my talent for seeing solutions where others saw only problems. I'd wanted so badly to share that pride with my mother. Mum, you'll never believe it, I just got promoted to senior project coordinator. Oh, that's nice, honey. Her voice had carried that distinctive, distracted quality I knew so well. Listen, while I have you on the phone, can you do me a favour? Emily needs someone to drive her to the mall this Saturday. She's got her eye on some shoes for a party, and you know how those long shopping trips give me terrible headaches. I'd said yes, of course. I always said yes. Now, as I took the familiar exit toward my hometown, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying invisible burdens for too long. But I was here, and I'd brought thoughtful gifts, and I would smile through dinner no matter what cutting remarks came my way. I didn't know that tonight would change everything, starting with how they saw me. The front door swung open, before I could even reach for the handle. Emily stood there, radiant, in a cream-coloured sweater that probably cost more than she earned in a month, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves. Behind her, I could hear the warm buzz of family gathering, the clink of dishes, the low murmur of conversation punctuated by laughter. Vanessa, Emily called out, but her attention was already drifting back over her shoulder. Mom, she's here. I barely had time to step through the doorway before my mother rushed past me, arms outstretched. For one foolish heartbeat, I thought she was coming to embrace me. Instead, she swept Emily into a tight hug, pulling back to cup her face with both hands. My precious girl. Let me look at you. Mum's voice carried that special warmth she reserved exclusively for my sister. Oh, you're glowing. Have you lost weight? You look absolutely stunning. Come here. Let me see that sweater up close. Is it cashmere? I stood there in the entryway, still holding my purse and the carefully wrapped gifts, feeling the cold November air seeping in behind me. Mum glanced at me over Emily's shoulder, her expression shifting to something closer to mild irritation. Oh, you're here. Good. Hang up your coat properly. Vanessa, don't just drop it on the chair like you usually do. And close that door, you're letting all the heat out. I'd never dropped my coat on a chair in my life, but I swallowed the correction and quietly hung my coat on the rack. The gifts felt heavier in my arms as I carried them toward the living room where Dad sat in his worn leather armchair. He looked older than I remembered from my last visit 3 months ago, more tired somehow, with new lines etched around his eyes. But when he saw me, his face brightened with genuine warmth. There's my girl, he said softly, starting to rise. Don't get up, Dad, I said quickly, leaning down to kiss his cheek. His skin felt papery thin under my lips. How are you feeling? Oh, you know, can't complain. He patted my hand, but I noticed the slight tremor in his fingers. Good to have you home, sweetheart. I set the gifts on the coffee table, arranging them carefully. As I straightened, I noticed a man standing by the fireplace, watching me with an intensity that made me pause. This had to be Dylan, Emily's fiancé. I'd heard about him over the past 6 months, the successful businessman, the charming gentleman who'd swept my sister off her feet. In person, he was handsome in that polished, deliberate way that spoke of expensive haircuts and tailored clothes. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They weren't looking at me with the dismissive indifference I'd grown accustomed to from Emily's previous boyfriends. Instead, he was studying me the way someone might appraise a painting at an auction, calculating, measuring, assessing value. You must be Vanessa, he said, crossing the room with an extended hand. His grip was firm, held just a beat too long. Dylan Pierce, Emily's told me so much about you. I doubted that very much, but I smiled politely. Nice to meet you. Mum had followed us into the living room, still fluttering around Emily, like a moth around a flame. Oh, gifts. How thoughtful. Emily, show everyone what you brought. Emily produced a bottle of wine from a paper bag, the kind with a $20 price tag visible on the neck. Mum gasped as if Emily had handed her a priceless treasure. Oh, honey, this is too much. Your favourite kind, isn't it, Robert? Emily always knows exactly what we like. You're so thoughtful, sweetheart. Mum clutched the bottle to her chest like it was made of gold. I glanced at my own carefully wrapped packages sitting untouched on the coffee table. Mum hadn't even acknowledged them. The vintage watch I'd spent weeks searching for. The designer bag that cost more than my monthly car payment. The expensive floral arrangement that was probably wilting in my car because I'd forgotten to bring it in. Vanessa brought gifts too, Dad said quietly, gesturing toward the table. Yes, I see them. Mum's tone suggested she'd already forgotten about them. We'll open everything later. Emily, come help me in the kitchen. I need your opinion on the stuffing. You know your palate is so much more refined than mine. As they disappeared together, their heads bent close, in conspiratorial conversation, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Aunt Martha, my mother's younger sister, stood beside me. At 68, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Mum had never possessed. Her silver hair was styled simply, and her dark eyes held a depth of understanding that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. It's good to see you, dear, she said softly, pulling me into a brief embrace. When she pulled back, she kept hold of my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her expression that looked almost like grief. Then she leaned close and whispered so quietly that only I could hear, "Stand strong tonight, dear." I didn't understand what she meant then. Dinner was served with the kind of orchestrated chaos that only family gatherings can produce. The dining room table groaned under the weight of Mum's traditional spread turkey, stuffing green bean, casserole, cranberry sauce, sweet potato pie. Everyone found their seats in the order that had been established over decades. Dad at the head of the table, Mum to his right, Emily to his left in the place of honour. Dylan sat beside Emily, playing the role of attentive fiancé with practiced ease. I was relegated to the far end next to Aunt Martha, nearly an arm's length from the centre of conversation. The meal had barely begun when Mum launched into what I privately called the Emily Show. It was a performance I'd witnessed countless times, though it never hurt any less. "Emily, sweetheart, tell everyone about your nails!" Mum gushed, reaching across the table to grasp my sister's hand. "Look at this. Aren't they gorgeous?" She got them done at that new salon downtown. "What's it called, honey? Polished," Emily said, flexing her fingers to show off the perfectly manicured French tips. "They do amazing work." "Oh, they're absolutely stunning," Mum cooed. "You have such exquisite taste, Emily. You always know exactly what looks elegant." Uncle Ray, Dad's brother, who'd driven in from Ohio, nodded politely. "Very nice. Speaking of work, Emily, how are things going at the office?" Before Emily could answer, Mum jumped in with breathless excitement. "Oh, things are going wonderfully. Dylan is considering promoting her, aren't you, Dylan? She's been doing such exceptional work." I watched Dylan's face carefully. There was a microsecond of hesitation, a tiny flicker of something I couldn't quite name before he smiled smoothly. "Emily's been a valuable asset to the team." It wasn't a confirmation I noticed. It was the kind of non-answer that politicians give when they want to avoid lying outright. But Mum heard what she wanted to hear and beamed with pride. "Did you hear that Robert our Emily is moving up in the world? I always knew she was destined for great things." Aunt Martha cleared her throat gently. "And Vanessa dear, how is your work going? You're in project management, aren't you?" I felt a small flutter of gratitude for the question, for being seen, even briefly. "Yes, she's always working," Mum interrupted, not even looking in my direction as she passed the gravy boat to Emily. "Too busy to visit family most of the time. Career comes first for some people, I suppose. Not like Emily, who always makes time for the people who matter." The words landed like small sharp stones. I picked up my water glass to give my hand something to do to hide the way my fingers wanted to tremble. Across the table, I saw Dad's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. He never did. Actually, Dylan said, and I was surprised to hear him speaking directly to me. I think it's admirable when someone is dedicated to their profession. Project management requires a certain level of maturity and organisational skill that not everyone possesses. He tilted his head slightly, studying me again with that appraising look. Vanessa strikes me as someone who's very mature and professional in her approach to life. The comment hung in the air, unexpected and oddly weighted. Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and she glanced at Dylan with something that looked almost like suspicion. Mum's expression pinched slightly, as if she'd tasted something sour. Well, yes, of course, Vanessa is professional. Mum said the word somehow, sounding like an insult in her mouth. Very serious, very focused. Not everyone can be as naturally charming and personable as Emily. Some people have to work harder at connecting with others. Mum, Emily started, and for a moment I thought she might actually defend me. No, I'm not criticising, Mum continued, warming to her theme. I'm simply saying that you, my darling girl, have a gift. You light up every room you enter. People are just drawn to you. It's effortless for you in a way that others have to struggle for. I watched Emily's face as Mum spoke, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A tightness around her eyes, a slight downturn at the corners of her mouth. She looked, I realised with surprise, overwhelmed, almost trapped. The expression vanished so quickly, I might have imagined it replaced by her usual radiant smile, but I'd seen it. You're too kind, Mum, Emily said softly, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Weariness, maybe, or resignation. Too kind, I'm just being honest. You're perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. Mum reached over to pat Emily's hand, her eyes shining with pride and something fiercer, something possessive. My perfect girl. Emily's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but Mum didn't seem to notice. Dylan was watching both of them now, his expression unreadable. Aunt Martha had gone very still beside me, her fork resting forgotten on her plate. The conversation moved on to other topics: Uncle Ray's new boat, the neighbour's recent surgery, the weather forecast for the weekend. I contributed when directly addressed, smiled when appropriate, and tried to ignore the familiar ache of being perpetually on the outside looking in. The food tasted like sawdust in my mouth, but I kept eating, kept nodding, kept pretending that everything was fine. I was almost starting to believe I could make it through the evening intact, when my mother stood up, wineglass in hand, and what she said next shattered the last bit of calm I had left. Mum's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as she stood, the sound cutting through the ambient dinner conversation like a knife. She held her wineglass aloft, and the chatter around the table gradually died away as everyone turned their attention to her. I felt my stomach clench with the familiar dread, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the particular tilt of her head, or the brightness in her eyes that spoke of wine-loosened inhibitions and long-held resentments finally finding voice. I'd like to make a toast, she announced, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that I'd learned to recognise as danger. To family, to this beautiful Thanksgiving, and especially to Emily and Dylan. Emily ducked her head modestly, but she was smiling. Dylan raised his own glass with practiced grace. Around the table, everyone else lifted their drinks in polite anticipation. We're so blessed to have Emily in our lives, Mum continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled family members with theatrical warmth. She's everything a mother could hope for in a daughter. Beautiful, caring, always putting family first. She paused, and I saw the exact moment her eyes landed on me. The warmth drained from her expression, like water from a cracked vase. And I hope that Vanessa will learn to contribute to this family the way her sister does. Maybe then she'll understand what it really means to be part of something bigger than herself. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. Around the table, I could sense the shift in atmosphere, the sudden, uncomfortable tension as people realised this wasn't a normal toast anymore. But Mum wasn't finished. If anything, she was gaining momentum, her voice growing louder, more pointed. The wine had loosened something in her that was usually kept just barely restrained. "You know what I think?" No. She wasn't really asking. Women need to take care of family. That's what we're meant to do. That's our purpose. But some women, she looked directly at me now, and there was something almost gleeful in her expression. Some women are so busy with their careers, so focused on themselves, that they forget what really matters. No wonder you can't keep a man interested, Vanessa. No wonder you're still alone at 35. The room had gone completely silent. I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. My hands were gripping my napkin so hard that my knuckles had turned white. "Actually," Mum said, warming to her theme, with the particular cruelty that only family can truly master, "I think you might be ruining this whole family. Here we are, trying to celebrate, trying to come together, and you can't even be bothered to engage. You sit there with that distant look on your face, like you're too good for us, too important, too busy." Uncle Ray coughed awkwardly into his hand. Aunt Martha's face had gone pale. Dad was staring down at his plate, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite bring himself to speak. And then I heard it laughter. Nervous, uncomfortable laughter rippling around the table like a wave seeking the path of least resistance. Emily's laugh was the clearest tinkling and bright, accompanied by a smile that I'd seen 1,000 times before. That smile that said she was the favourite, the chosen one, and nothing I did would ever change that. Dylan chuckled along, shaking his head slightly, as if Mum had just made an amusing observation about the weather, rather than publicly eviscerating her own daughter. Even Uncle Ray managed a weak chuckle, and our cousin Jennifer, who I'd helped move into her first apartment 3 years ago, looked away and smiled into her wine glass. Only Dad and Aunt Martha remained silent, but their silence felt like abandonment too. Dad couldn't even meet my eyes. I should have cried. That's what Mum expected. That's what would have satisfied her, I think, to see me break down to prove her point about my weakness, my inadequacy. I should have stood up and left, driven back to the city, cut them out of my life forever. But I didn't do either of those things. Instead, I felt something click into place inside me, something hard and clear and cold. I'd spent 35 years trying to earn my mother's love, trying to prove my worth to people who had decided long ago that I would never measure up. And in that moment, sitting at that Thanksgiving table, while my family laughed at my humiliation, I realised something profound. I was done. I picked up my wine glass with a steady hand. I took a long, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I set the glass down carefully and looked my mother directly in the eyes. "Thank you for the reminder, Mother," I said. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. I even managed a small smile. The smile seemed to unsettle her more than tears would have. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she was trying to figure out what I was playing at. Around the table, people shifted in their seats. The laughter had died away, replaced by an uncertain quiet. That's when Dylan leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression curious and calculating. He was watching me with those appraising eyes again, but there was something different in them now. Something that looked almost like interest or perhaps recognition, as if he'd just noticed something about me that he hadn't seen before. Then he asked me a question I knew had ulterior motives. "So, Vanessa," Dylan said, his tone carrying a studied casualness that didn't quite mask the intentionality behind it. "What exactly do you do for work? Must be something pretty important, right?" The question hung in the air, and I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. This was it, the moment they expected me to fumble, to stammer out some self-deprecating explanation, to minimize myself the way I'd been trained to do since childhood, to prove my mother right about my inadequacy by being flustered, defensive, or worst of all, desperate to prove my worth. Dylan was leaning forward, with his forearms on the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He looked genuinely curious, but there was something else underneath that curiosity, something watchful. He reminded me suddenly of the corporate executives I dealt with at work, the ones who asked seemingly innocent questions, while mentally calculating how to leverage the information to their advantage. "I'm a project manager," I said, simply meeting his gaze with a calmness that surprised even me. Nothing glamorous. I could feel Mum bristling at my end of the table, could sense her preparing to interject with some cutting remark. But Dylan spoke first, his head tilting slightly to one side. "Project management is a pretty broad field," he said. "What kind of projects? Corporate construction technology?" He was fishing. I could hear it in the way he framed the question, leaving it open-ended, inviting me to fill the space with details. In the business world, I'd learned to recognize when someone was trying to assess your value, your connections, your potential usefulness. This had that same quality. "Various types," I replied with a slight smile. "Whatever needs managing." The vagueness of my answer clearly frustrated him. I saw the tiniest flicker of impatience cross his features before he smoothed it away. Around the table, people had started picking up their forks again, the tension of my mother's earlier attack beginning to dissipate into the usual post-dinner lethargy. "That's interesting," Dylan persisted. "So you must work with teams, coordinate different departments, handle budgets, that kind of thing?" "Sometimes," I said, taking another sip of wine. I wasn't being deliberately evasive, or rather I was, but it came naturally. Years of being dismissed by my family had taught me not to share the details of my successes. They'd only be minimized, reframed as lucky breaks or exaggerations. So I'd learned to keep my victories small and private, shared only with myself. "What size projects?" he asked. "Small, local stuff or something bigger?" Before I could formulate another non-answer, Mum's voice cut through the conversation like a guillotine blade. "She always says things like that," Mum announced to the table at large, though her eyes were fixed on Dylan with an intensity that seemed almost protective of her previous narrative. "Very mysterious about her work? If you ask me, I think she exaggerates her job's importance to make herself sound more impressive than she really is." The words landed exactly as she'd intended them to, casting doubt, diminishing, reframing my professional reticence as dishonesty rather than privacy. Emily nodded along her expression, one of sympathetic agreement, as if she'd long harboured similar suspicions about my tendency to inflate my own significance. "It's not that impressive, Mum," I said quietly, and I meant it. Not because my work wasn't impressive, I knew it was, but because I'd learned that impressive things became targets in this family. Things to be torn down, minimised, explained away. "Well, project management can mean anything," Emily chimed in, her voice carrying that particular blend of sweetness and condescension that she'd perfected over the years. "I mean, technically, someone organising a birthday party could call themselves a project manager." A few people chuckled at that. Uncle Ray snorted into his napkin. Mum smiled with satisfaction, as if Emily had made an excellent point. Dylan, however, wasn't laughing. He was still watching me with that calculating expression, and I realised something that made my spine straighten imperceptibly. He didn't believe them, or rather, he wasn't sure whether to believe them, and that uncertainty was making him probe deeper. "Do you work for a large company?" he asked, ignoring Emily's comment entirely. "Or are you freelance?" "A company," I said. "Here in the city?" "Nearby." I could see frustration building behind his polite facade. He was a man used to getting answers, used to people offering up information freely, especially when he showed interest. My reticence was clearly unusual in his experience. "Dylan, honey, you're interrogating poor Vanessa," Emily said with a light laugh, placing her hand on his arm. There was something possessive in the gesture, something territorial. "She obviously doesn't like talking about work at family dinners. Some people like to keep things separate." "No, it's fine," Dylan said, but his eyes never left my face. "I'm just curious. You seem like someone who's good at what you do. There's a certain way people carry themselves when they're competent in their field. You have that quality." The compliment, if it was a compliment, felt weighted with subtext. Mum's mouth had pressed into a thin line. Aunt Martha had gone very still beside me, her hand resting on her water glass, like she was bracing for something. "That's kind of you to say," I replied, and this time my smile was genuine, though not for the reasons anyone at that table might have assumed, because in that moment I understood something crucial. Dylan wasn't asking about my job out of polite dinner conversation. He was assessing me, evaluating me, trying to determine if I was worth his attention. And the careful way I was deflecting his questions, the composure I'd shown in the face of my mother's attack, these things had piqued his interest rather than dismissing it. That smile was my first declaration of war. Not against him specifically, though I sensed he might become an adversary, but against the entire system that had kept me small, kept me apologizing for my existence, kept me grateful for scraps of acknowledgement from people who should have loved me unconditionally. And Dylan, he was calculating something. I could see it in the way his eyes tracked my expressions, in the slight tension in his jaw when I deflected his questions. Whatever conclusion he was reaching, whatever pieces he was putting together in his mind, I knew with absolute certainty that it had nothing to do with genuine interest in me as a person. He was looking at me the way a businessman looks at a potential asset, and that told me everything I needed to know. I excused myself quietly from the table, muttering something about needing air that no one really acknowledged. The conversation had already moved on to football scores and Black Friday shopping plans. My mother's attack and Dylan's pointed questions already fading into the background noise of family gathering. That was how it always worked, wounds inflicted in public, then ignored as if they'd never happened. The November evening hit me like a cold slap as I stepped onto the back porch, but I welcomed it. The air smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves, that particular scent of autumn, giving way to winter. I gripped the porch railing and let myself take a full breath for what felt like the first time in hours. My hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline finally catching up with me now that I was alone. Behind me, the screen door creaked open. I turned, expecting Emily come to twist the knife a bit deeper, or my mother ready to deliver another lecture about my failings. Instead, Aunt Martha stepped out carrying 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to me without a word, and I wrapped my cold fingers around it gratefully, inhaling the familiar scent of chamomile and honey. "You've endured too much, child," she said softly, settling into the old wicker chair that had been on this porch for as long as I could remember. Something about the gentleness in her voice, the simple acknowledgement of my pain, cracked the careful composure I'd been maintaining. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. "I'm fine," I said, automatically the lie I'd been telling for decades. "No," Aunt Martha said, her tone still gentle but firm. "You're not, and you haven't been for a very long time." I took a sip of tea to buy myself time to push down the emotion threatening to surge up. Through the window, I could see the family still gathered around the table, my mother gesturing animatedly as she told some story Emily, laughing at something Dylan whispered in her ear. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Happy, family-blessed gathering. No one would ever guess what had happened just minutes before. "I've witnessed 35 years of this. Gio." Aunt Martha continued her gaze following mine through the window. "Watched your mother do to you exactly what was done to her." I turned to look at her surprised. "What do you mean?" Aunt Martha's expression was sad, weighted with old knowledge. "Your grandmother was not a kind woman, Vanessa. She had 3 daughters, and my sister, your mother, was the middle child. The forgotten one. Nothing she did was ever good enough. She was too plain, too awkward, too unremarkable compared to our older sister who was beautiful, and our younger sister who was charming." She paused, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Your mother was desperate for love her entire childhood. Desperate to be seen, to be special to someone. Then why would she do the same thing to me?" The words came out sharper than I intended, edged with pain I'd been suppressing for years. "Because she's terrified," Aunt Martha said simply. "Terrified that if she doesn't have someone to feel superior to, she'll go back to being that overlooked middle daughter. Emily is her second chance, her do-over. The beautiful, perfect daughter she wishes she'd been. And you, she reached over and squeezed my hand. You became the scapegoat, the one she could diminish to make herself feel bigger. And the explanation didn't make it hurt less. But somehow it made it make sense in a way it never had before. I'd spent so many years wondering what was wrong with me, what fundamental flaw made me unlovable to my own mother. To understand it wasn't about me at all was both liberating and devastating. Your father, Aunt Martha said after a moment of silence. He knows everything. He's watched it all happen and it's eaten at him more than you probably realise. Then why doesn't he do anything? The old bitterness crept into my voice. Why does he just sit there and let her... He's waiting for something, Aunt Martha interrupted. For you, I think. For you to be ready to stand up for yourself. She set down her mug and reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulling out a small cream-coloured envelope. He asked me to give you this. Tonight, specifically. He said you'd know when you needed it. I took the envelope with trembling fingers. My name was written on the front in my father's careful handwriting. The paper felt expensive, substantial, like the kind used for important documents. What is it? I don't know. He didn't tell me. Aunt Martha stood, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. But he said to tell you, open this when you need it most. She paused at the screen door, looking back at me with eyes that held both sorrow and something that might have been hope. You're stronger than you know, Vanessa. Stronger than she ever let you believe you were. After she went back inside, I stood alone on the porch, turning the envelope over in my hands. I could open it now, but something told me to wait. My father had been specific when I needed it most. And, while tonight had been brutal, I wasn't quite there yet. I wasn't at my lowest point, wasn't at that place where I had nothing left to lose. But I could feel it coming, could sense that this Thanksgiving dinner was just the beginning of something larger, some shift that had been building for years and was finally starting to break through the surface. I slipped the envelope into my purse and finished my tea. Inside, I could hear someone starting to clear dishes, the familiar sounds of a holiday meal winding down. I'd have to go back in there, smile through goodbyes, accept my mother's perfunctory kiss on the cheek, as if nothing had happened. Drive 4 hours back to my apartment, back to my real life, where I was respected and valued for what I could do. But I drove home that night with 2 things: my father's envelope and the determination to change everything. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I finally stumbled through the door at nearly midnight. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the quiet darkness for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. No judgmental looks, no cutting remarks, no performance required. Just me, alone with the wreckage of the evening still churning in my chest. I should have gone straight to bed. I had work in the morning emails to answer a Monday morning meeting that required preparation. But I found myself pulling out my father's envelope instead, sitting down at my small kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink. The envelope sat in front of me, innocuous and terrifying all at once. Open this when you need it most, he'd said through Aunt Martha. But when was that exactly when I hit rock bottom? When I finally broke under the weight of years of being invisible? Or was it now, in this moment of strange clarity, where I'd finally stopped hoping for things to change and started accepting them for what they were? My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal. The paper tore with a soft whisper, and I pulled out several folded sheets in my father's careful handwriting. For a long moment, I just held them, afraid of what they might contain. Then I unfolded the first page and began to read. My dearest Vanessa. It began, and something about seeing those words in his handwriting made my throat tighten. If you're reading this, then Martha has given you this letter, and it means the time has come for you to know some truths I should have told you long ago. I took a shaky breath and kept reading. I know what you've endured. I've watched it happen for 35 years, and my greatest shame is that I didn't protect you better. I told myself I was keeping the peace, maintaining family harmony, but the truth is, I was a coward. I let your mother's pain become your burden, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. The words blurred slightly. I blinked hard and continued. There are things you need to know. Things I've kept to myself because I wanted to see people's true nature when they thought I was too weak to notice or too naive to understand. I'm not actually as ill as I've let everyone believe, Vanessa. The doctors say I'm remarkably healthy for a man my age. A few minor issues, yes, but nothing serious. I've been exaggerating my health problems for the past year, watching how people respond when they think I'm fading. I set the letter down, my heart pounding. Dad wasn't sick. All those concerned phone calls from Mum. Emily's dramatic tears, the whole family tiptoeing around his condition. It was a test. I picked up the letter again, my hand steadier now, driven by a need to understand. Your sister Emily has borrowed $47,000 from me over the past 3 years. Credit card debt, personal loans, rent, when she couldn't make payments. Each time she promised to pay me back, and each time she told your mother she was managing fine on her own. Your mother has no idea how financially dependent Emily has become. $47,000. I felt the number settle in my stomach like a stone. All those times Mum had praised Emily's independence, her ability to live such a stylish life on her salary, her financial responsibility. All lies, or at least all built on Dad's secret support. Dylan, the letter continued, and I felt my spine straighten, has met with me twice in the past month. He didn't ask about Emily's well-being or our family history. He asked about assets, about property holdings, about what would happen to the family estate when I'm gone. He wanted to know specifically how things would be divided between you and Emily. He thinks I'm too ill to notice the calculation behind his questions. I thought of Dylan's probing questions at dinner, the way he'd assessed me with those cold, appraising eyes. Not contemptuous, but calculating, measuring my worth, trying to determine if I was a valuable connection or a waste of his time. Your mother, Dad wrote, and I could hear the sadness in the words, even on paper, is afraid. She's terrified, actually, though she'd never admit it. Afraid that if you become too successful, too independent, too whole without her, you'll leave and she'll lose control. Her cruelty toward you isn't really about you at all. It's about her desperate need to keep someone smaller than herself so she can feel big. Emily is her trophy, but you, my dear girl, you're her scapegoat, and she needs both to survive. I pressed my hand to my mouth, feeling something break open inside me. Not the breaking of more damage, but the breaking of truth, finally cutting through years of confusion and self-doubt. You deserve to be loved, Vanessa, not for what you do or how useful you are or how much you sacrifice, but simply for who you are. I should have fought harder to give you that. I should have stood up to your mother years ago. The final paragraph was shorter, written in slightly shakier handwriting, as if he'd come back to add it later. I believe you'll stand up for yourself at the right time. I believe you'll find your strength when you need it most. And when you do know that I'll be standing with you. You're not alone in this, sweetheart. You never were. The letter slipped from my fingers onto the table. I sat there in my quiet kitchen as tears streamed down my face, hot and fast and cleansing. But this time, they weren't tears of pain or humiliation or that familiar ache of being unseen. They were tears of anger. Pure, clarifying anger at the years I'd wasted trying to earn love that was being deliberately withheld. Anger at my mother's manipulation, at Emily's willful blindness, at Dylan's calculated opportunism. Anger at myself for accepting it all for so long, and beneath the anger, something harder and brighter determination. I sat there, tears streaming down, but this time not from pain, from anger. And I knew what I had to do. Sleep was impossible. My mind was racing too fast, my father's words echoing in my head like bells that couldn't be unrung. Emily owed him $47,000. Dylan was asking about assets. My mother was afraid of losing control. The pieces were there, scattered across years of family dynamics I'd never fully understood. and I needed to see the whole picture. I made myself a cup of coffee, even though it was nearly 1 a.m, and opened my laptop. The screen's glow illuminated my small kitchen, casting everything else into shadow. My email archive went back years, organised into folders, because that's the kind of person I was. Methodical, careful, someone who kept records, even when she didn't know why they might matter. I typed Emily's name into the search bar and watched hundreds of messages populate the screen. Birthday, wishes, forwarded jokes, links to articles she thought I'd find interesting. And then, buried among the mundane exchanges, I found what I was looking for, the requests for help. The first one was from 4 years ago, casual and cheerful in that way Emily had of making serious things sound light. Hey, sis, quick question, do you know anything about consolidating credit card debt? Asking for a friend, LOL. But seriously, if you have any advice, I'd love to pick your brain. I clicked through to my response. I'd sent her a detailed breakdown of consolidation options, interest rate comparisons, a recommended financial advisor, professional, thorough sisterly. I didn't remember if she'd ever thanked me. The second email was 18 months later. Vanessa, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a bind with my car payment. Could you look over my budget and tell me where I might be able to cut back? Mum would freak if she knew I was struggling. So please don't mention this to her. I'd helped her create a spreadsheet, identified unnecessary expenses, suggested specific cuts. I'd spent 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon fixing her financial mess, and she'd sent back a quick, "You're the best," before going radio silent for 2 months. Email after email, the pattern was clear. Emily asking for help, me providing it without question. Emily disappearing until the next crisis. 5 times over the past 4 years, and each time I dropped everything to assist her. Each time I'd kept her secret from Mum, protecting her from the judgment and disappointment that would have shattered her golden child status. But it was the 6th email that made me pause, made something twist painfully in my chest. It was dated 3 years ago, sent at 2:30 in the morning. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." I opened it and felt my anger shift into something more complicated. "Sis," it began, and the lack of her usual chirpy greeting was immediately noticeable. "I know it's late, and you're probably asleep, but I just needed to tell someone, and you're the only person who might understand. I don't know what I'd do without you. Seriously, everyone else sees this perfect version of me that doesn't actually exist, and I'm so tired of trying to maintain it." I scrolled down my coffee, growing cold beside me. Mom keeps saying I'm perfect. She says it every time I see her, every phone call, every text. My perfect Emily, my perfect girl. And I know I should be grateful that she loves me so much, but the pressure is crushing me. I can't tell her when I'm struggling because she's built this whole identity around having a successful, put-together daughter. If she knew how much debt I'm in, how many times I've been late on rent, how close I came to getting fired last month because I couldn't focus, it would destroy her. It would destroy this image she needs me to be. My throat tightened. I scrolled faster. Sometimes I just want to be allowed to be weak, to mess up, to not have every decision I make treated like it's evidence of my inherent superiority. You don't know how lucky you are, Vanessa. You can fail, and it's expected. You can struggle, and it's just proof of what they already believed about you. But me, I can't afford a single mistake because then I'm not perfect anymore. And if I'm not perfect, then what am I to her? The email ended. There no signature, as if she'd simply stopped typing mid-thought and hit send before she could talk herself out of it. I sat back in my chair staring at the words on the screen. I'd responded to this email, I remembered now. I'd sent something supportive and empathetic, suggested we meet for coffee to talk it through. Emily had never responded. The next time she'd reached out 3 months later, it was as if this vulnerable moment had never happened, back to her usual breezy requests for advice, delivered with casual cheerfulness. I searched for more recent emails, looking for financial requests. There were 2 more over the past year, both asking for help reviewing loan documents and budgeting advice. And then just 6 weeks ago, a message that now read very differently in light of my father's letter. Hey, quick favour, do you know how bankruptcy works? Not for me, obviously, just curious about the process. Also, do you think Dad would be upset if I asked to borrow some money? Nothing major, just a few thousand to get through the holidays. Let me know your thoughts. A few thousand. When she'd already borrowed $47,000 from him that I hadn't known about. When she was drowning in debt that my father's letter suggested now totaled $68,000, including credit cards and personal loans. I pulled up a calculator and did rough math based on the information in the emails. If Emily was making what she claimed to make at her job, and if her rent was what she'd mentioned in passing, and if the debt totals were even close to accurate, she was barely treading water. One unexpected expense, one missed payment, and the whole carefully constructed facade would come crashing down. And suddenly I understood. Emily wasn't maliciously using me. She was drowning, desperately trying to keep her head above water, while maintaining the image our mother needed her to project. She couldn't tell Mum the truth because Mum had invested too much in Emily being perfect. She couldn't stop asking me for help because I was the only person who knew even part of the truth. She was trapped, just like I was, just in a different kind of cage. The realization didn't erase the hurt of how she'd smiled at my humiliation tonight. Didn't excuse the years of letting Mum tear me down while she basked in unearned praise, but it complicated things in a way that made simple anger harder to maintain. Emily wasn't purely my enemy. She was also a victim of the same toxic dynamic that had made my life hell, just on the opposite side of it. Mum had crippled her with favouritism the same way she'd wounded me with neglect. 2 daughters, both damaged, both struggling, both unable to be honest about who they really were. But pitying Emily didn't mean I would continue staying silent. I needed to know the truth about Dylan. I looked at the clock. 2:15 in the morning. Too late to call anyone under normal circumstances, but Marcus Chen wasn't bound by normal hours. I'd worked with him on 3 different corporate projects over the past 5 years. Situations where companies needed discreet background checks on potential partners or verification of credentials that seemed too good to be true. Marcus ran a private investigation firm that specialised in corporate due diligence, and more importantly, he owed me a favour from when I'd recommended him to my company's legal department for a sensitive case. I pulled up his contact information and sent a text. Marcus, it's Vanessa Coleman. I need a background check. Personal matter, not corporate. How soon can you talk? The response came back in less than 30 seconds. Burning the midnight oil. Give me 5 minutes, then call. While I waited, I pulled up what little I knew about Dylan Pierce from Emily's social media. He kept his own accounts remarkably private, but I could piece together basics from what Emily had posted. They'd been together for 8 months. He worked in business consulting, which was vague enough to mean almost anything or nothing. He drove a nice car, wore expensive suits, and based on the restaurant check-ins Emily gleefully posted, he took her to places that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. My phone buzzed. I hit dial before it could ring twice. Vanessa, Marcus answered, his voice alert despite the hour. What do we have? I need everything you can find on someone. Dylan Pierce, mid-30s, currently dating my sister, claims to be a business consultant. I need employment, verification, financial background, relationship history, the works. There was a pause. This doesn't sound like your usual corporate request. It's not, I said. It's personal, and I need it fast. Fast costs more. I don't care. How soon can you have something preliminary? I heard typing on his end. If I pull people off other projects and grease some palms for expedited records, 48 hours for basics, maybe 72 for the deeper stuff. Do it, I said. Send the invoice to my personal email. You want to tell me what this is about? I hesitated, then decided honesty might speed things up. My father mentioned that this man has been asking questions about family assets. Tonight, at dinner, he was probing about my career in a way that felt calculated. My sister is in serious debt, and I need to know if he's aware of that or if he thinks he's marrying into money. Ah, Marcus said, and I could hear the understanding in his voice. One of those, yeah, I'll prioritise this. Give me his known associate's employer if you have any other details. I told him everything I knew, which wasn't much. Marcus promised to be in touch as soon as he had anything solid. The call ended just before 3 a.m. I should have gone to bed, but instead I found myself scrolling through Emily's Instagram again, looking at photos of her and Dylan with new eyes. In every picture, his smile was perfect. His arm around her shoulders was positioned just right for the camera. He looked like the ideal boyfriend, successful and attentive and completely smitten. But Dad's words kept echoing. He asked about assets, about what would happen when I'm gone. I finally forced myself to sleep around 4, setting my alarm for 7, despite knowing I'd feel like death. Work waited for no one, not even for family crises and late-night investigations. The next day crawled by. I went through the motions at the office, attended my meetings, responded to emails, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time my phone buzzed, I grabbed for it, hoping for news from Marcus. It came at 6:30 that evening, just as I was packing up to leave. Preliminary findings. You're going to want to see this in person. My office, 20 minutes. I made it in 50. Marcus's office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place that looked like it housed accountants and insurance adjusters. Nothing that screamed private investigation. He met me at the door and ushered me into his conference room, where several folders were spread across the table. I'm going to be straight with you, he said, sitting down across from me. This guy is bad news. He slid the first folder toward me. Dylan Pierce, 37 years old. He's been unemployed for 6 months, not 3, like he's apparently been telling people. Lost his last position at a consulting firm under circumstances they won't discuss, which usually means either fraud or sexual harassment. I'm still working on getting the details. My stomach dropped. 6 months. It gets worse, Marcus continued, opening another folder. 2 years ago, he was engaged to a woman named Catherine Morrison. Her family owns a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Northeast. Net worth in the 8 figures. He showed me a newspaper clipping and engagement announcement from a society page. Dylan looked younger, just as polished, standing next to a stunning blonde woman. The engagement was broken off after 6 months when Catherine's father hired someone like me to do a background check. Turned out Dylan was seeing 2 other women at the same time, one of whom he'd convinced to invest in a business venture that never materialized. He's a con artist, I said quietly. Among other things. Marcus pulled out another document. Current debt load is approximately $95,000. Most of it gambling. He's got accounts at 3 different casinos. All of them are showing voyeur regular losses. The kind of pattern that suggests addiction, not recreation. He slid across a series of photographs, the kind taken with telephoto lenses, from surveillance positions. Dylan, at dinner with a redhead leaning close across candlelight. Dylan, leaving a hotel with a brunette, his hand on the small of her back. Both photos were time-stamped within the past month. He's still cheating, I said, feeling sick for Emily despite everything. Actively and frequently. Marcus tapped the last folder. This is the part that's going to interest you most. 3 weeks ago, Dylan paid a financial researcher to pull property records and asset valuations for your family. Your parents' house investment accounts, where they're listed as beneficiaries, anything he could access through public records. He's researching us, I whispered. More specifically, he's researching you. Your name came up more than Emily's in the search parameters. Marcus met my eyes. Vanessa, this guy thinks someone in your family has money. Based on the questions he's been asking and the records he's pulling, I'd say he's trying to figure out which sister is the better mark. I looked at those photos and understood Dylan thinks I'm wealthy, and he's looking for a way to get close to me. I was still sitting in my car outside Marcus's office, staring at the manila folders on my passenger seat, when my phone rang. Dad's name lit up the screen, and for a moment I just looked at it, my heart pounding. After 35 years of silence, of watching from the sidelines while Mum tore me apart, he'd finally written me that letter. And now he was calling. I answered on the third ring. Dad, did you read my letter? His voice was quiet but steady, none of the frailty I'd heard at Thanksgiving dinner. Yes. My throat felt tight. I read it tonight. Last night, technically. I haven't slept much. I imagine not. There was a pause filled with decades of unspoken words. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, sweetheart. I'm sorry for a lot of things. Why didn't you? The question came out sharper than I intended. Why wait until now? Why let it go on for so long? I heard him take a breath, slow and measured. Because I wanted you to decide for yourself. I didn't want you to fight because I told you to, or because I gave you permission, or because I finally stepped in to rescue you. I wanted you to choose to stand up for yourself when you were ready. I could have used some support, I said, and I hated how my voice cracked on the last word. I know, and that's on me. That's my failure as a father. He paused. But, Vanessa, if I'd fought your battles for you, you'd always wonder if you were strong enough to fight them yourself. You'd always question whether you really deserved respect, or if people only gave it to you because I demanded it on your behalf. I needed you to discover your own strength. I wanted to argue with his logic, but some part of me understood it. How many times had I seen parents swoop in to fix their adult children's problems, leaving them perpetually dependent and uncertain? Still, the cost of his approach had been 35 years of pain. I found out about Dylan. I said, changing the subject because the emotional weight was too much. I had him investigated. He's worse than we thought. How much worse? Dad's voice sharpened with concern. I told him everything Marcus had discovered. The unemployment, the debts, the pattern of targeting wealthy women, the active cheating, the financial research into our family. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. That confirms what I suspected, Dad finally said. He met with me twice, Vanessa. Both times he claimed he wanted to get to know the family better, but every conversation circled back to assets and inheritance. The second time I recorded it. You recorded him. I sat up straighter. Is that legal? In our state, yes. One-party consent means I can record any conversation I'm part of without telling the other person. I had a feeling I might need evidence someday. His voice carried a grim satisfaction. Dylan asked me directly about property holdings, about how the estate would be divided between you and Emily, about whether there were any trusts or investment accounts. He was very careful about it, very smooth, but the intent was clear. Does Emily know you recorded this? No one knows, except Martha. And now, you. He paused. And before you ask yes, I'm willing to use it when the time comes. The words hung in the air between us. This wasn't just Dad gathering information anymore. This was Dad preparing for battle. There's something else you need to know, he continued. Your company is going to have good news for you next week. I can't tell you more than that, but be prepared for something significant. I frowned, confused. How would you know about my company? Because I may have been a passive father, but I've been paying attention to your career, Vanessa. I know you've been working on that major infrastructure project. I know your division director thinks you're the most talented project manager they've had in a decade. And I may have made a phone call or two not to influence anything. Your work speaks for itself, but to express a father's pride in his daughter's accomplishments. My eyes burned with unexpected tears. You did that. I should have done it years ago. Should have done a lot of things years ago. His voice grew firmer. But we're going to make it right now. I'm hosting a family dinner 2 weeks from Sunday. I'll tell your mother it's just a casual get-together, but it's going to be more than that. I want you to be ready. Ready for what? To stand in your truth. To let everyone see who you really are, not the diminished version your mother has been showing them. He paused. The contract signing ceremony your company wants to do, I asked them if they consider holding it at our house so I could be there. They agreed. It seemed appropriate. My mind was racing. A family dinner, a contract signing, Dylan's investigation into our finances. The pieces were arranging themselves into a picture I was only beginning to see. Dad, this is going to blow everything apart. The family, Emily's engagement, Mum's entire worldview. Are you sure you want to do this? There was no hesitation in his response. I've been waiting 35 years. The certainty in his voice, the steel underneath the quiet words, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a man who'd been passively watching anymore. This was a man who'd been strategically planning, gathering evidence, positioning pieces on a chessboard that the rest of us hadn't even known we were playing on. What about Emily? I asked quietly. This is going to destroy her. Emily is drowning in a life she can't sustain, propped up by lies and my money and your mother's delusions. Maybe it's time she learned to swim. His voice softened slightly. I'm not trying to hurt her, Vanessa. I'm trying to free both of you from the roles that your mother forced you into, but yes, it's going to hurt first. Growth usually does. I looked at the folders on my seat at the evidence of Dylan's predatory behaviour. I thought about Emily's late-night email, the one where she confessed to feeling crushed by the pressure of perfection. I thought about Mum's face when she'd called me a failure in front of the whole family. I asked Dad, "Are you sure you want to do this?" He replied, "I've been waiting 35 years." The email came through at 2:30 on Wednesday afternoon, marked high priority. Please come to Director Morrison's office at 3:00 p.m. today. Barbara Chen from HR will also be present. No context, no explanation, just the summons that made my stomach drop even though I'd done nothing wrong. I spent the next 30 minutes running through possibilities. Had I made an error on the infrastructure project? Was there a complaint from a team member I didn't know about? The presence of HR was particularly ominous. That usually meant either very good news or very bad news, and my experience had taught me to expect the latter. At 2:55, I straightened my blazer, grabbed my portfolio, and walked down the hallway to the executive suite with my heart hammering against my ribs. Dad had said there would be good news, but I'd learned not to trust promises even from him. Director Morrison's assistant waved me in immediately. They're expecting you. The office was corner suite, elegant, all-glass walls and minimalist furniture that spoke of both success and serious money. Director Sarah Morrison stood as I entered, a woman in her early 50s, whose steel grey hair and sharp suits had intimidated me when I first started working here. Barbara Chen from HR sat in one of the leather chairs, smiling in a way that made me relax slightly. In my experience, HR didn't smile when they were about to fire you. Vanessa, please sit down. Director Morrison gestured to the chair across from her desk. I imagine you're wondering why we called you in. The thought crossed my mind, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Well, I'll get straight to the point. We've been reviewing performance metrics across all departments, and your work over the past 3 years has been exceptional. The infrastructure project you've been managing is on track, under budget, and has received praise from every stakeholder involved. Your ability to coordinate across multiple departments, anticipate problems before they become crises, and maintain team morale through challenging timelines hasn't gone unnoticed. I felt my shoulders relax incrementally. This didn't sound like bad news. We'd like to offer you a promotion. Director Morrison continued, sliding a folder across her desk toward me. Senior Director of Strategic Projects. You'd be overseeing not just your current project, but the entire strategic portfolio. It's a significant increase in responsibility. I opened the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. The title was printed at the top of the offer letter, Senior Director of Strategic Projects. Below it, a salary figure that made me blink and read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $185,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that could add another $30,000 to $40,000. This is... I looked up, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Well deserved, Barbara Chen interjected warmly. For what it's worth, Vanessa, this decision was made 2 weeks ago. We've been finalising the paperwork and budget approvals, but the decision itself was based purely on your outstanding performance over the past 3 years. You've earned this entirely on your own merit. 2 weeks ago, before Thanksgiving, before Dad's letter, before I'd known any of this was coming. The timing clicked into place. This was what Dad had meant when he said my company would have good news. Somehow he'd known, but he hadn't influenced it. The pride in his voice on the phone made more sense now. There's one more thing, Director Morrison said, and something in her expression softened. Your father called our office last week. I hope you don't mind, but he asked about the contract signing ceremony we typically do for executive promotions. He expressed that he's very proud of you and asked if there was any possibility we could host the ceremony at his home so he could witness it in person, given his health situation. My throat tightened. Of course, he'd framed it around his health situation. The illness he'd admitted in his letter wasn't as serious as everyone believed. But the gesture itself, the request to be there to see this moment that was real. We thought it was a wonderful idea, she continued. It's actually quite touching. So if you're comfortable with it, we'd like to hold the signing ceremony at your family home. We'll bring the contracts, a few members of the executive team, make it a proper celebration. Your father sounded like he'd very much like to be part of this moment in your career. I imagined it, my company's executives arriving at my parents' house, the same house where I'd been publicly humiliated just days ago. Mum and Emily having to witness my success made tangible and official. Dylan seeing proof that I wasn't some struggling middle manager, but a senior director responsible for a $50 million portfolio. The symmetry was almost poetic. I think that would be lovely, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. When were you thinking, this Sunday would work well for us? Director Morrison said. I know it's quick, but we'd like to announce your promotion internally next Monday, and having the ceremony beforehand would be ideal. Would that timing work for you? This Sunday, 2 weeks to the day after Thanksgiving dinner. 2 weeks after my mother had told me I was ruining the family. 2 weeks after Dylan had started calculating my worth. Yes, I said, this Sunday works perfectly. We spent the next 20 minutes going over the details. My new responsibilities, the teams I'd be overseeing, the timeline for transition. I signed the offer letter with a hand that had stopped shaking, replaced by a steady certainty. This was real. This was mine. I'd earned it through years of long nights and careful work and strategic thinking that no one in my family had ever acknowledged. As I walked back to my office, the signed offer letter in my portfolio felt like ammunition, like proof, like the answer to every cutting remark my mother had ever made about my career being less important than Emily's theoretical potential. I called Dad the moment I got back to my desk, closing my office door for privacy. I got the promotion, I said when he answered. I know, congratulations, sweetheart. You deserved every bit of it. The ceremony is this Sunday, at your house. I know that too. There was satisfaction in his voice. Everything is falling into place. The contract signing will be this Sunday, exactly 2 weeks after that terrible Thanksgiving dinner. The phone's shrill ring jolted me from the first real sleep I'd managed in days. I fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. Emily's name glowed in the dark. 2:17 in the morning. My first instinct was to ignore it. Let it go to voicemail. Whatever crisis she was manufacturing could wait until morning. But something made me answer, perhaps the memory of that vulnerable email from 3 years ago, the one where she'd admitted the crushing weight of perfection. Emily. My voice was rough with interrupted sleep. The sound that came through the phone made me sit up immediately. Sobbing harsh and uncontrolled, the kind of crying that comes from someone who's been holding everything together too long and has finally shattered. Sis. she managed between gasping breaths. I'm sorry, I know it's late. I didn't know who else to call. I turned on my bedside lamp, suddenly wide awake. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is it Dylan? Everything, she said, and the word came out like a wail. Everything is wrong, and I don't know what to do anymore. I waited, letting her cry, hearing years of accumulated pressure breaking through in those sobs. When she finally spoke again, the words tumbled out in a desperate rush. I got written up at work today. Final warning. They said if I'm late one more time, or if my performance doesn't improve immediately, they're letting me go. And I can't, Vanessa. I can't lose this job. I'm already 3 months behind on my car payment and my credit cards are maxed out, and my landlord is threatening eviction because I've been late on rent twice. How much debt are you in? I asked quietly, even though I already knew from Dad's letter and my email investigation. I don't know. I'm scared to add it all up. Her voice broke. Maybe 60,000, maybe more. And Dylan has been so distant lately. He barely answers my texts, and when we're together, he's distracted looking at his phone all the time. I think he's losing interest because he can tell I'm a mess. I thought about the photos Marcus had shown me. Dylan at dinner with other women. Dylan researching our family's finances. Dylan's pattern of targeting wealthy women and discarding them when they were no longer useful. Emily had no idea she was dating a predator who'd already decided she wasn't valuable enough. Mum keeps calling me, Emily continued, asking when Dylan and I are setting a wedding date, talking about how perfect we are together, how proud she is that I found such a successful man. And I can't tell her the truth. I can't tell her I'm drowning, that I'm about to lose everything, that I'm a complete failure at adult life. She thinks I'm perfect, Vanessa. If she knew the truth, it would destroy her. Or it would destroy the image she's built of you, I said gently. Those aren't the same thing. Emily made a sound that might have been agreement or just more crying. I don't know what to do. I've tried budgeting, I've tried cutting back, but there's never enough money, and I'm so tired of pretending everything is fine when I'm barely keeping my head above water. Here it came. I could feel the request forming before she spoke it. Sis, I hate to ask, but could you lend me some money? Just 10,000. I know it's a lot, but I promise I'll pay you back. I just need to catch up on everything, get some breathing room. Then I can figure out a plan. $10,000 on top of the $47,000 she already owed Dad, on top of the credit card debt and personal loans she'd racked up trying to maintain the lifestyle Mum expected her perfect daughter to have. It would be like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. I thought about that email from 3 years ago, the one where she'd admitted to wanting permission to be weak, to fail, to stop performing perfection. I'd offered to help her, then suggested we talk it through, and she'd ghosted me. Months later, she'd bounced back to her usual cheerful facade, asking for another favour, as if that moment of vulnerability had never happened. Emily, I said carefully, I'm not going to lend you money. The silence on the other end was thick with shock and hurt. But I will help you, I continued before she could hang up or start pleading. I'll help you create a real budget, not just a temporary fix. I'll help you talk to a credit counsellor, maybe look into debt consolidation. I'll help you update your resume and search for a better job, one that pays what you're actually worth, instead of what you've been settling for. And, if you want, I'll be there with you when you tell Mum the truth. I can't tell Mum, Emily said immediately, her voice rising with panic. You don't understand what it's like. She calls me every day to tell me how proud she is, how perfect I am, how I'm everything she hoped for in a daughter. If I tell her I'm failing, you're not failing, Emily, you're human. There's a difference. I kept my voice steady, trying to project the calm confidence I'd learned in years of managing teams through crises. But as long as you keep pretending, as long as you keep borrowing money to maintain an image that isn't real, you're going to keep sinking deeper. I can't save you with money, but I can help you save yourself. Another long silence. I could almost hear her mind working, weighing the options. Accept help that would require honesty and hard work, or keep scrambling for quick fixes that would let her maintain the facade a little longer. I need to think about it, she finally said, her voice small. Okay, but Emily, the offer expires after this weekend. After Sunday, things are going to change and I won't be able to help you the way I can right now. What happened Sunday? She sounded confused, and I realised she had no idea about my promotion, about the contract signing, about anything that was about to unfold. You'll see, I said. Call me before then if you want my help. Really want it. Vanessa, she started, but I heard the shift in her tone, moving from desperation to defensiveness. You don't understand what it's like to be me. You've always had it easier because Mum never expected anything from you. I have to be perfect. I don't have a choice. Shit. The words stung even though I'd been expecting them. Even in crisis, even after admitting she was drowning, Emily still saw my neglect as easier than her favouritism. You're right, I said quietly. I don't understand what it's like to be you. Just like you've never understood what it's like to be me. But we're both trapped, Emily, just in different cages, and I'm offering you a way out. Emily hung up, and I knew she wouldn't choose the path I offered. The text came through just after lunch on Friday, an unknown number that my phone didn't recognise. I almost deleted it as spam before I saw the message preview. Hi Vanessa, it's Dylan. Got your number from Emily's phone, hope you don't mind. I stared at the screen, a cold awareness settling over me. He'd taken my number without asking Emily or me. The boundary violation was subtle but deliberate, a way of establishing access while maintaining plausible deniability. If I called him out, he could claim he thought Emily wouldn't mind, that it was innocent. But I knew better. I took a screenshot before responding, opening a new folder on my phone labelled simply, Evidence. What can I help you with? I typed back, keeping it neutral. The response came within seconds, as if he'd been waiting. I wanted to apologise if I came across as nosy at Thanksgiving. I'm just genuinely impressed by people who work hard and succeed on their own merit. Emily talks about you a lot, actually, says you're much more accomplished than she gives you credit for. The flattery was transparent, but I could see how it would work on someone who wasn't expecting it. Compare the target favourably to someone they're close to, make them feel seen and appreciated, create a sense of alliance. Classic manipulation technique. That's kind of you to say, I replied, then waited to see where he'd take it. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about project management. I've been considering a career shift and your field seems fascinating. There it was, the manufactured excuse for contact, the false pretext of professional interest. I thought about Marcus's report about Dylan's pattern of targeting women, getting close under false pretenses, then exploiting whatever value they had to offer. I'm pretty swamped with work right now, I wrote. Big project wrapping up. Oh. The response was immediate, too eager. Anything exciting? I smiled at my phone screen. He'd taken the bait exactly as I'd expected. Just some contract finalizations, nothing glamorous. Emily mentioned you might have some kind of signing ceremony coming up. She said your dad was excited about something with your company. My fingers paused over the keyboard. Emily had told him, or more likely he'd probed until she'd mentioned it, not realising she was feeding him information. I wondered how many casual questions he'd asked her, how many details he'd extracted about our family, under the guise of caring interest. Did she? I typed. She must have overheard Dad talking about it. It's just a formality. I'm sure you're being modest. Another quick response. What level are you at now, Director VP? The question was too direct, too obviously fishing. A genuinely interested person would have built up to that, would have shown interest in the work itself before asking about titles and hierarchy. But Dylan didn't care about the work. He cared about status, about compensation, about what I might be worth. Just a manager, I lied smoothly. Nothing special. I find that hard to believe. Was there frustration in that message? Annoyance that I wasn't giving him the information he wanted? You seem very capable. I bet you're making quite a good living. There it was, not even subtle anymore. A direct probe about money barely disguised as a compliment. I took another screenshot. I do okay, I typed. Enough to pay my bills. I could almost feel his frustration through the screen. He tried flattery professional interest, and now he was circling back to Emily, looking for another angle. You know, Emily is lucky to have a sister like you, someone successful and stable she can look up to. She's been stressed about work lately. I'm sure you've noticed. So he knew about Emily's job troubles. Interesting. Was he preparing to distance himself from her now that she was proving to be less financially secure than he'd hoped? Or was this his way of suggesting I should step in to help her conveniently, making me more accessible to him in the process? Emily's very capable. I wrote, she'll figure things out. Of course. Though we all need support sometimes, right? Another screenshot. Actually, that's kind of why I wanted to reach out. I know things were a bit tense at Thanksgiving, and I thought maybe we could all get together before the holidays get too crazy. You, me, Emily, maybe your parents. I'd love to get to know the family better. I bet he would. Get closer to Dad, assess the house and property values, first-hand position himself as the caring boyfriend who wanted to integrate into the family. And now that I knew about the contract signing on Sunday, his sudden interest in family gathering took on a more sinister edge. That's thoughtful, I replied, but this weekend is pretty packed for me. Maybe after the holidays. Oh, right, the signing ceremony thing. Is that this weekend? Emily wasn't sure about the timing. He was fishing again, trying to confirm details, trying to figure out if this was something significant or just a minor corporate formality. I could give him vague answers and keep him guessing, or I could give him just enough rope to hang himself with. It's Sunday, I typed. At my parents' house, actually. My dad wanted to be there. I added one more line, the bait he couldn't resist. Should be a nice afternoon, nothing too formal. The response came quickly. That sounds wonderful. I'm sure Emily and I would love to be there to support you. I hadn't invited him, hadn't even hinted at an invitation, but he'd invited himself anyway, unable to resist the opportunity to assess the situation firsthand, to see what kind of contract signing warranted holding at a family home, to calculate what it might mean for his plans. I took a final screenshot of the entire conversation and backed it up to my cloud storage. Then I responded with careful neutrality. I'll mention it to my dad. He's coordinating with my company. Great. Looking forward to it. I set my phone down and stared at the screen for a long moment. Dylan had shown his hand more clearly than he probably realised. The manufactured interest, the probing questions, the self-invitation to a family event. It all painted a picture of someone hunting for opportunity, not building genuine connection. I knew Dylan was hunting me, and I would let him reveal his true face in front of everyone. My mother called an hour later, and I knew before I answered that Emily had run to her. It was the pattern we'd fallen into over decades. Emily would ask me for something, I'd set a boundary, and Mum would swoop in to enforce Emily's demands under the guise of family obligation. I let it ring 3 times while I saved the document I was working on and took a breath to send to myself. Then I answered. Vanessa. Mum's voice was sharp, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Emily called me very upset. She said you refused to help her when she asked. That's not accurate. I replied calmly, switching my phone to speaker so I could continue reviewing the contract language on my screen. Multitasking helped me stay detached, kept this from feeling like the emotional ambush it was designed to be. I refused to lend her money. I offered to help her in other ways, budgeting, job searching, talking to a credit counsellor. She doesn't need a credit counsellor, Vanessa. She needs her sister to help her through a rough patch. Mum's tone carried that particular blend of disappointment and accusation she'd perfected over the years. She's family. You don't turn your back on family. I thought about all the times I'd helped Emily, all the hours I'd spent fixing her problems, while Mum praised her for being so capable and independent. I thought about the $47,000 she owed Dad, that Mum didn't even know about. I thought about that late-night email where Emily had admitted she was drowning in the pressure of perfection. "I'm not turning my back on her," I said. "I'm offering her actual help instead of a temporary bandage that won't solve the underlying problem." "The underlying problem is that she needs money, Vanessa. She's about to lose her apartment. Do you want your sister to be homeless?" Emily is not about to be homeless. She's facing consequences for financial choices she's made, and the kindest thing I can do is help her learn to manage those consequences instead of enabling her to keep making the same mistakes. Enabling, Mum's voice rose. "You're calling helping your sister enabling. You're the older sister, Vanessa. You have responsibilities to this family. You have to take care of her." Something in that phrase, "you have to take care of her," struck a nerve I didn't even know was still exposed. How many times had I heard that over the years? How many of my own needs had been dismissed because I had to take care of Emily? Had to put the family first, had to sacrifice because that was my role. "What did you raise me for?" I asked, and my voice came out colder than I intended. "Seriously, Mum, what was the point of raising me if not to be Emily's permanent support system?" The question hung in the air. I could hear her breathing on the other end, could almost feel her recalibrating, trying to figure out why I wasn't backing down the way I always had before. "I raised you to be part of this family," she said finally. "To understand that we take care of each other. Emily would do the same for you." Would she? I wanted to ask. When have I ever needed help that Emily offered? When have I ever been allowed to be weak or struggling or imperfect? But I didn't say it. Instead, I said something that felt more true. "You raised me to be independent, to work hard, to solve my own problems, to not need anyone's help." My voice was steady, now certain. "And that's exactly what I'm trying to teach Emily. I want her to be independent too. I want her to have the strength to stand on her own feet instead of constantly looking for someone to catch her." That's very philosophical, Vanessa, but your sister needs help right now. Real help, not life lessons. "The real help is teaching her to fish instead of giving her a fish," I said. "I've given her fish for years, Mum. Free financial advice, budget planning, debt management strategies. And she keeps coming back hungrier because she never learned to feed herself." "So you're punishing her for asking for help? You're deliberately letting her suffer to prove some kind of point." "I'm setting a boundary," I corrected. "There's a difference." Mum's voice dropped into that dangerous register that used to make me immediately backpedal and apologise. "You're being selfish. You're putting your own pride and your own principles above your sister's well-being." This is exactly what I was talking about at Thanksgiving. You're so focused on yourself that you can't see how you're damaging this family. And there it was, the real accusation, the one that had been hovering behind every criticism she'd ever levelled at me. That I was selfish for having boundaries. That I was damaging the family by refusing to be its perpetual caretaker and scapegoat. Something shifted in my chest, like a lock finally clicking open after years of trying the wrong key. "If having boundaries makes me selfish," I said quietly, "then I guess I'm selfish, and I'm okay with that." Vanessa Marie Coleman. "I have to go, Mum. I have work to finish." "Don't you dare hang up on me. We're not done with this conversation." "Yes," I said, "we are." And for the first time in my 35 years of life, I hung up on my mother. My hand was shaking as I set the phone down on my desk. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. Set a boundary and enforced it, and refused to be pulled back into the circular argument designed to wear me down until I complied. The phone didn't ring again. No immediate callback, no flurry of angry texts, no escalation, just silence. I sat there for a long moment, waiting for the guilt to crash over me, for the familiar anxiety that came with defying my mother's expectations. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not quite peace, but maybe the space where peace could eventually grow. Mother didn't call back, but I knew the storm was coming. The call came at 8:15 Friday night, just as I was settling onto my couch with leftover takeout and a glass of wine. I'd survived the week, finished the critical work items, and was trying to decompress before Sunday's contract signing when my phone lit up with Mum's name. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, still raw from our earlier confrontation, but something made me answer, perhaps the lateness of the call, the unusual timing. "Vanessa." Mum's voice was high and panicked, completely different from the cold anger of this afternoon. "You need to come home right now. Your father collapsed. We're at County General Hospital." My wine glass hit the coffee table hard enough that some sloshed over the rim. "What happened? Is he conscious?" "They're running tests. He fell in the kitchen and couldn't get up. The ambulance just brought us in." Her voice cracked convincingly. "Please, Vanessa. He's asking for you." I was already grabbing my keys, my phone wedged between my shoulder and ear. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 4 hours." The drive was a blur of highway lights and rising panic. I kept telling myself that Dad had admitted in his letter he was exaggerating his health issues, that this might be part of his test. But what if it wasn't? What if something had actually happened, and our last conversation would have been about strategy and timing instead of anything that mattered? I made the 4-hour drive in 3.5, pushing my car harder than I should have, arriving at County General just before midnight. Mum and Emily were in the ICU waiting room. Emily's mascara smeared from crying Mum, pacing with her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Where is he?" I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Room 412, Mum said. They're only allowing family in 2 at a time. Emily just went in with Aunt Martha." I pushed through the doors without waiting for permission, following the room numbers until I found 412 out. Through the window, I could see Dad in the hospital bed, looking small and fragile, in a way that made my chest ache. Emily sat in the chair beside him, holding his hand and crying softly. Aunt Martha stood at the foot of the bed, her expression unreadable. I knocked softly and entered. Emily looked up, her face blotchy and swollen. "Vanessa! Oh God, Vanessa, I'm so scared." "What did the doctors say?" "They don't know yet. They're running more tests in the morning." She stood kissing Dad's forehead. "I should let you have time with him. I need to call Dylan anyway, let him know what's happening." After she left, Aunt Martha caught my eye and held it for a long moment. Then she gave the tiniest shake of her head, so subtle I might have imagined it, and followed Emily out. I pulled the chair close to Dad's bed. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady and deep. Too steady, I thought. Too regular for someone who'd collapsed just hours ago. "Dad," I whispered. "It's me." He didn't respond, but I thought I saw his eyelids flutter slightly. I stayed. Through the night, through the shift changes, through the morning rounds, when doctors asked questions I couldn't answer because I didn't live here anymore. Emily and Mum came and went. Emily crying dramatically, each visit Mum directing nurses and demanding updates with the authority of someone used to being in charge. But neither of them stayed. "We'll come back in the morning," Mum said around 2 a.m. "Emily has work and I need to rest. You'll call if anything changes." I nodded and they left. I dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair, waking every time a nurse came to check vitals. Saturday passed in a haze of hospital coffee and waiting. Emily visited twice, staying for 20 minutes each time before declaring she couldn't bear to see Dad like this. Mum came for an hour mid-afternoon, spent most of it on her phone coordinating with relatives, then left to go run some errands. Sunday morning arrived and I was still there. I'd been at the hospital for almost 3 full days, leaving only to grab coffee from the cafeteria or use the bathroom. My clothes felt stale, my eyes gritty from poor sleep. The contract signing was scheduled for this afternoon, and I'd missed calls from Director Morrison asking if we needed to reschedule. I was staring out the window, watching the sunrise, when I heard sheets rustling behind me. I turned to find Dad's eyes open, looking at me with clear, steady awareness. How long have you been here? He asked, his voice rough but not weak. Since Friday night. Dad, what happened? I'm fine. Sweetheart. He pushed himself up slightly, and I noticed the movement was stronger than it should have been for someone who'd supposedly collapsed. I just wanted to see how they'd react. The pieces clicked into place. This was part of your test? You faked this. Exaggerated it, he corrected gently. I did feel dizzy Friday evening. I may have played it up a bit when your mother called 911. His eyes held mine. You've been here the whole time. Of course I have. Your mother and Emily. They visited, but neither of them stayed overnight. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, but confirmation. Only you stayed. That tells me everything I needed to know. I sank back into the chair, exhausted and relieved and angry all at once. Dad, I thought you were dying. I know. I'm sorry for that. He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and strong. But I needed to know who would actually be there when it mattered. Not for show, not for an audience, but in the quiet hours when there's no one to impress. Emily does care about you, I said, surprising myself by defending her. She's just performative, Dad finished. She cares in the way your mother taught her to care, loudly, dramatically, and only when it's convenient. He squeezed my hand. You care quietly, steadily. You show up. Tears burned at my eyes, exhaustion and emotion finally breaking through. The contract signing is this afternoon, at your house. I need to, I'll be there, he said firmly. I'm checking myself out this morning. The doctors will protest, but there's nothing actually wrong with me. His expression grew more serious. At the family dinner Sunday, I'll stand with you. Dad squeezed my hand. At the family dinner Sunday, I'll stand with you. I was in my car halfway between the hospital and my apartment when Emily's call came through. I'd left Dad coordinating his discharge with increasingly frustrated nurses who insisted he needed to stay for more observation. He'd waved me off, telling me to go home, shower and prepare for this afternoon. I almost didn't answer. I was running on 3 days of hospital coffee and fitful sleep in uncomfortable chairs, and I still needed to make myself presentable for the contract signing in less than 4 hours. But something made me hit accept. Vanessa! Emily's voice was tight controlled in a way that immediately put me on alert. I need to talk to you. I'm driving. Can it wait until... No, it can't wait. The control cracked slightly. I lost my job. They fired me this morning, called me on a Sunday to tell me not to bother coming in tomorrow. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, unsurprised, but still feeling a pang of sympathy. Emily, I'm sorry. That's really hard. Hard, her voice rose sharply. It's a disaster, and it's your fault. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, needing to focus entirely on this conversation. How is it my fault that you lost your job? Because if you'd helped me when I asked, if you'd just lent me the money like I begged you to, I could have gotten my car fixed and wouldn't have been late. So many times I could have paid off some of my credit cards and wouldn't have been so stressed and distracted. But you refused, and now I've lost everything. The logic was so twisted, so desperately looking for someone else to blame, that I almost didn't know where to start. Emily, you lost your job because of chronic tardiness and poor performance. Those are the reasons they gave you, aren't they? Yes, but not because your sister wouldn't lend you money, not because of anything I did or didn't do. You made choices, and this is the consequence. How can you be so cold? Her voice broke into sobs. I'm losing my apartment. I lost my job. Dylan is barely speaking to me, and you're sitting there lecturing me about consequences like some kind of robot. I thought about telling her the truth about Dylan, about the gambling debts, the other women, the way he'd been researching our family finances. But that felt cruel right now. One devastation too many. I'm not being cold, I said quietly. I'm being honest. You called me at 2 in the morning begging for help, and I offered it. Real help, budget, counselling, job search, assistance, help facing mum with the truth. You chose not to take it. Because that's not help. That's you being condescending and superior, acting like you have all the answers. No, Emily, that's me trying to help you build skills instead of just temporarily solving problems that will keep coming back. I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. I've been enabling you for years. Every time you asked for financial advice, every time I helped you fix a crisis without telling mum, every time I kept your secrets, I was helping you avoid growing up. There it is. Emily's voice turned sharp bitter. You always think you're better than me. You always have. Mum was right about you. You're selfish and cold, and you don't actually care about family. You only care about being able to feel superior. The accusation stung less than it would have even a week ago. I'd spent too many hours examining my family's dynamics, too much time understanding the toxic patterns we'd all been trapped in. If that's what you believe, I said calmly, then you're right, I can't help you. Not because I don't care, but because you don't actually want help. You want rescue. And I'm not doing that anymore. Of course you're not, because you're too busy with your perfect career and your perfect life to care that your sister is drowning. My perfect life. A bitter laugh escaped me. Emily, you have no idea what my life has been like. None. Because you've been too wrapped up in maintaining your image as mum's perfect daughter to notice that I've spent 35 years being invisible. Oh, here we go. Poor Vanessa, always the victim. You know what? You're not the victim. You're just bitter because mum loves me more and you can't stand it. The words should have destroyed me. A week ago they might have. But now, after Dad's letter, after 3 days of being the only one who stayed at his bedside, after finally setting boundaries and refusing to back down, they just felt tired. You're right, I said, and my voice was steady. Mum does love you more. She always has. But Emily, that love has crippled you. It's made you dependent and entitled and unable to cope with anything that doesn't go exactly as you expect. And the saddest part is you can't even see it. Don't you dare. I'm done, Emily. The words came out final, decisive. If you believe I'm selfish and cold and don't care about family, then don't call me anymore. Find someone else to blame for your problems. I'm finished being your scapegoat. Vanessa, you can't just... I can, and I am. When you're ready to take actual responsibility for your life, when you're ready to accept real help, instead of just looking for someone to rescue you, then we can talk. But until then, I'm done. Fine, Emily shouted. I don't need you anyway. I have Dylan, and I have Mum, and they actually care about me. I thought about Dylan's texts. To me, his self-invitation to this afternoon's event, the photos of him with other women. I thought about Mum's selective love, the way she'd built Emily up into a fragile facade that was now crumbling. I hope that works out for you, I said quietly. And then I hung up. I sat in my car in that gas station parking lot staring at my phone, waiting for the familiar guilt to crash over me. The guilt that had always followed whenever I disappointed someone in my family, whenever I failed to meet their expectations, or refused to sacrifice myself on the altar of their needs. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something lighter, freer, like I'd been carrying a weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I hung up, and this time I felt no guilt whatsoever. I'd barely made it through my apartment door when the knocking started. Loud, insistent, the kind of knocking that said the person on the other side wasn't going to leave until they got what they wanted. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Only one person knocked like that, like they owned every space they entered, like patience was beneath them. I opened the door to find my mother standing in the hallway, her face tight with barely controlled anger, her designer purse clutched in one hand like a weapon. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "Now." I closed the door and turned to face her, noticing with detached clarity that I wasn't intimidated. I should have been. This was the woman who'd spent 35 years making me feel small with just a look. But after 3 days of hospital vigil, after hanging up on Emily without guilt, I felt something different. Tired, yes, but also done. Emily called me hysterical. Mum began, not bothering with preamble. "She lost her job this morning, and apparently you refused to help her when she needed you most. Again. I want an explanation, Vanessa. What is wrong with you?" "Nothing is wrong with me," I said calmly. "I offered Emily help. She rejected it because it wasn't the kind of help she wanted. She needed money. That's what help looks like when someone is in crisis. You give them what they need. No, Mum, what she needed was to face the consequences of her choices and learn to manage her life. Money would have just delayed the inevitable." Mum's eyes flashed dangerously. "You sound so righteous, so superior, like you've never needed help, never made a mistake. But let me remind you of something. You wouldn't even be where you are without this family's support." The claim was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Really? Name one time this family supported me. One specific instance where you or Emily helped me with anything." She opened her mouth, then closed it visibly, searching for an example. "We've always been there for you." Being there isn't the same as support, Mum. Do you remember how many times I've helped Emily over the years actually helped? Not just been there. That's different. You're the older sister. That's your... Do you remember when Emily wanted to study abroad in Paris? I interrupted, and I felt memories flooding back with crystalline clarity. She didn't have the money. Dad was between jobs. You asked me if I could contribute, and I did. I borrowed $5,000 from Dad money I paid back over 2 years so Emily could have her semester in France. Mum's expression shifted slightly. That was generous of you. Do you remember when Emily maxed out her first credit card and was too scared to tell you I was 26? I'd just started my first real job. She called me crying and I paid off $4,000 of her debt. Told her not to mention it to you because you'd be disappointed. I didn't know about that. Exactly. I felt something building in my chest. Not anger, but a kind of righteous clarity. Do you remember when I was working 2 jobs to save for grad school when you called asking if I could send money home? Because Emily needed a new laptop for work, I sent $700. I never went to grad school. Vanessa. I've helped Emily with her resume 6 times, coached her for job interviews, given her financial advice she never followed, covered her share of Dad's birthday gift 3 years in a row because she was short on cash. I've been helping her for 15 years, Mum, quietly, without recognition, without thanks, because that's what family does. Mum's face had gone pale. If that's all true, then why won't you help her now when she really needs it? Because that was my duty, right? I looked at her directly, holding her gaze. That's what you were going to say before I interrupted, that helping Emily was my duty as the older sister. She didn't deny it. No, Mother, that was love. That was me loving my sister and wanting her to succeed, and I gave too much without receiving anything in return. Not gratitude, not recognition, not even the basic respect of being treated like I matter. You're being dramatic. At Thanksgiving dinner, you told everyone I was ruining this family. You said it in front of relatives, in front of Emily's boyfriend, in front of Dad. And when Emily lost her job this morning, her job because of her own tardiness and poor performance, she called to tell me it was my fault. My fault for not lending her money. My fault for setting a boundary. Mum's hands twisted around her purse strap. She's upset. She didn't mean... She meant every word, just like you meant every word at Thanksgiving. I took a breath, steadying myself. From now on, I only help people who respect me. If Emily wants my help, she needs to learn to respect her sister. If you want a relationship with me, you need to learn to respect your daughter. Not the daughter you wished I was, but the one I actually am. You can't seriously be giving me conditions for our relationship. I'm your mother. And I'm your daughter, which apparently means I'm supposed to accept being diminished and dismissed and blamed for everyone else's problems. I shook my head. I'm done with that, Mum. I'm done being the family scapegoat so Emily can be the golden child. I'm done sacrificing myself so you can avoid dealing with your own issues. My own issues, her voice rose. What issues do you think I have? You're terrified, I said quietly. Terrified that if I succeed too much, I'll leave and you'll lose control. Terrified that if Emily fails, it means you failed. So you keep us both trapped, me as the failure who can never do anything right, Emily as the perfect daughter who can never admit weakness. It's not love, Mum. It's manipulation disguised as love. The words hit her like physical blows. I watched her face cycle through shock, denial, anger, and then something that looked almost like fear. How dare you speak to me like this? She whispered. I'm speaking to you with honesty. For the first time in my life, I'm telling you the truth instead of what you want to hear. I moved toward the door, opening it. Now I need to shower and get ready. Dad's being discharged from the hospital and there's a family gathering this afternoon. I assume you'll be there. She stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin in that familiar gesture of wounded dignity and walked toward the door. She paused in the doorway. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but I don't think so. Mother stood up and walked out without a word, but I saw a crack had formed. I was pulling clothes from my closet, trying to decide what to wear, to my own professional triumph, when my phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Dylan's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my jaw tighten. The text read, Hey Vanessa, heard you have some good news about work. Congratulations. I stared at the message, my mind immediately cataloguing the implications. I'd been careful not to mention the promotion to anyone in my family except Dad. The company had kept it confidential until the signing. So how did Dylan know I typed back carefully? Did Emily tell you? The response came within seconds. No, just guessing. You work hard and I figured something good must be coming your way. The lie was clumsy, too quick, too defensive. I could practically see him scrambling to cover his tracks. That's kind of you, I replied, deciding to test him further. It's just a routine thing, nothing special. Still, any excuse for celebration, right? Then, after a brief pause, another message came through. Actually, I heard the signing ceremony is at your dad's house. That's really nice that they're doing it there so he can attend. What time is it? Emily and I would love to be there to support you. I read the message 3 times, feeling pieces click into place with sharp precision. I had never told Emily about the promotion. Not in our 2 a.m. call, not in our final argument this morning. I deliberately kept it quiet, planning for the ceremony to be the reveal. Dad had arranged it with my company, but he told Mum it was just a family dinner, deliberately vague. So, how did Dylan know it was a signing ceremony? How did he know the specific purpose of the gathering? I sat down on my bed, phone in hand, thinking through the timeline. Dad had asked my company to host the ceremony at his house. The company would have called Dad to coordinate. Dad would have told Mum that we were having a family gathering Sunday afternoon, probably mentioning that my company would be there, but keeping the promotion detail quiet for maximum impact. Mum would have told Emily about the family dinner, and that Dad was out of the hospital. Emily would have mentioned it to Dylan in passing. Probably something like, we have to go to my parents' house Sunday afternoon, some family thing with Vanessa's work. But Dylan's text revealed he knew it was a signing ceremony. Those specific words, that specific detail that Emily wouldn't have known to share because Mum hadn't told her. Which meant Dylan had either been researching my company, making calls, or had somehow accessed information he shouldn't have had. Just like Dad had said, just like Marcus's investigation had revealed. Dylan had hired someone to dig into our family finances, and apparently was also investigating my professional situation. I took a screenshot of his messages and added them to my evidence folder, then typed a response. I don't think Emily mentioned it to you because I haven't told Emily about any of this. The 3 dots disappeared again. He was typing and deleting, trying to figure out how to walk back his mistake. Finally, "Oh, maybe I overheard her talking to your mum. I must have misunderstood what it was about. My mistake." Another lie. Another attempt to cover his tracks. But he'd already revealed too much. "Actually," I typed, "how did you know it was a signing ceremony? I'm curious where you heard that specific detail." The 3 dots appeared and stayed for a long time. Whatever answer he was crafting, he was taking his time with it. "I think your dad mentioned it when I was visiting him in the hospital. Or maybe it was your mum. Sorry, everything's been a blur with your dad's health scare." The excuse was smooth, believable. Except Dad had been unconscious or resting whenever Dylan would have visited, and Mum didn't know about the promotion or signing ceremony either, just that there was a family gathering. "That makes sense," I lied back. "See you this afternoon then. Should be around 2 p.m. "Can't wait. Really proud of you, Vanessa." I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked different than it had just days ago, sharper, somehow more focused. The woman looking back at me wasn't someone who would shrink from confrontation or doubt her own perceptions. Dylan had made a critical error. He'd revealed knowledge he shouldn't have possessed, trying to seem supportive, while actually betraying that he'd been digging into my professional life. Combined with Marcus's evidence of him researching our family finances, this sealed it. He wasn't just Emily's opportunistic boyfriend. He was actively investigating, calculating, positioning himself for maximum advantage. And this afternoon, when he showed up, expecting to assess the situation and continue his manipulation, he'd walk right into a trap of his own making. I knew immediately Dylan had been investigating. And he was about to dig his own grave. I pulled up to my parents' house at exactly 2 o'clock to find the driveway already filling with cars. Director Morrison's sleek black sedan was parked near the garage, and I recognised 2 other vehicles belonging to senior colleagues from the office. My company was here, treating this like the significant professional milestone it was. I took a moment in my car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. 2 weeks ago, I'd driven up this same driveway for Thanksgiving dinner, bracing myself for the familiar pattern of being overlooked and diminished. Now I was returning as Senior Director of Strategic Projects, with my father's support and my own hard-won clarity about my worth. Dad met me at the door, looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd supposedly collapsed just days ago. He pulled me into a tight embrace and whispered, "You ready for this?" "I think so." "You've earned this moment, sweetheart. All of it." He squeezed my shoulder. "They're setting up in the living room. Your mother and Emily aren't here yet, but they should arrive any minute." Inside, my childhood home had been transformed into something approaching a professional venue. The coffee table had been cleared, documents arranged neatly with the company logo visible. Director Morrison was speaking with Aunt Martha, who looked elegant and knowing in a navy dress. 3 of my colleagues stood near the fireplace, including James Chen, the vice president, who'd mentored me through the infrastructure project. "Vanessa," Director Morrison crossed the room to greet me, shaking my hand warmly. "Your father has been the perfect host. This is such a lovely way to celebrate your promotion." "Thank you for accommodating the unusual location," I said. "Are you kidding? It's refreshing. And your father clearly wants to be part of this moment." She lowered her voice slightly. "He's very proud of you. He told me you've been managing impossible timelines with grace for years." Before I could respond, I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I saw Emily's car pulling up Dylan, emerging from the passenger side dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Emily made in a month. Behind them, Mum's car appeared and I watched my mother step out looking confused and slightly annoyed at the number of unfamiliar vehicles. Dad moved to open the door, greeting them with his usual warmth. "Come in! Come in! We have quite a gathering!" Emily entered first, her eyes scanning the room with growing confusion. She'd clearly dressed for a casual family dinner, nice jeans and a sweater, and looked suddenly underdressed next to my colleagues in their business attire. Dylan followed, his expression shifting from casual confidence to sharp assessment as he took in the professional setup. Mum was the last to enter, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and then something approaching alarm as she recognised this was not the simple family gathering she'd been expecting. "Robert, what is all this?" she asked, her voice tight. "This," Dad said, moving to stand beside me with his hand on my shoulder, "is a contract signing ceremony for Vanessa's promotion. I wanted to be here to witness it, so her company was kind enough to accommodate us." Director Morrison stepped forward, extending her hand to my mother. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm Sarah Morrison, Director of Strategic Operations. You must be very proud of Vanessa. She's been an exceptional asset to our organisation." Mum shook her hand mechanically, her eyes moving from the director to me to the documents on the table. "Promotion. I'd like to formally introduce Senior Director Vanessa Coleman." Director Morrison continued, addressing the room. "Effective immediately, Vanessa will be leading our Strategic Projects Division with direct responsibility for our $50 million infrastructure initiative. This represents one of the largest project portfolios in our company's history." The words hung in the air. $50 million. Senior Director. I watched my mother's face drain of colour, watched Emily's mouth fall open in shock. But it was Dylan's reaction that interested me most. His eyes had lit up with something that looked almost hungry, his posture straightening as he recalculated whatever assessment he'd been making. James Chen, who'd been quiet until now, raised his glass of champagne that Aunt Martha had thoughtfully distributed. "I've worked with a lot of project managers in my 20 years with this company," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Vanessa is the most talented professional we've ever had the privilege of working with. She doesn't just manage projects, she transforms them. She sees solutions where others see obstacles." "Hear, hear," another colleague chimed in, and the small group raised their glasses. I accepted my own glass with hands that were steadier than I expected. Through the cluster of congratulations, I could see Emily standing frozen, processing the reality that her supposedly unsuccessful older sister was actually running a $50 million portfolio. Dylan had moved closer, trying to catch my eye with an expression of exaggerated pride that made my skin crawl. But it was my mother's face that held my attention. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, speechless for perhaps the first time in her life, her carefully constructed narrative about her disappointing older daughter crumbling in real time. My mother sat there speechless, but the worst was yet to come. The contract signing itself had been brief and professional. Director Morrison presenting the documents, me signing with a pen that felt weighted with significance, my colleagues offering congratulations. Dad stood beside me the entire time, his hand on my shoulder, his pride visible to everyone in the room. Afterward, Aunt Martha had orchestrated a light reception with catering she'd apparently arranged in secret. As guests mingled with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, I watched my family's reactions play out like a slow-motion car crash. Mum had recovered enough to paste on a tight smile and make stilted conversation with my colleagues, but I could see the tremor in her hands as she held her champagne flute. Emily had retreated to a corner, staring at her phone, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And Dylan, dear Dylan, was working the room. Like the predator, he was shaking hands, making charming small talk, slowly positioning himself closer to me. I excused myself from a conversation with James about the transition timeline and slipped into Dad's study, needing a moment to breathe. Through the window, I could see the backyard where I'd stood with Aunt Martha on Thanksgiving night, receiving Dad's mysterious letter. So much had changed in just 2 weeks. I pulled out my phone, opening the recording app and hitting start. In our state, one-party consent made this completely legal. I was part of any conversation I chose to record. I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket microphone, positioned to capture audio clearly. The study door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "There you are," Dylan said, his voice carrying that smooth charm that probably worked on most people. "I've been wanting to talk to you privately." I turned slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "Have you—" He closed the door behind him, not quite shutting it completely, but enough to create the illusion of privacy. He'd had several glasses of champagne. I could see it in the slight looseness of his movements, the way his carefully maintained facade was starting to slip. "You're really impressive, Vanessa." He moved closer into what would normally be considered personal space. "Senior Director, $50 million. That's significant money you're managing." "It's a significant responsibility," I corrected. Of course. He waved a hand dismissively. "But come on with that kind of portfolio, your compensation must be substantial. 6 figures easily right." There it was, the immediate pivot to money. Not congratulations on my achievement, not interest in the work itself, just calculation of my financial worth. "I do well enough?" I said vaguely. "I bet you do." His smile widened and he leaned against Dad's desk with false casualness. "Listen, I've been thinking. You and I should have dinner sometime, without the family chaos. We could discuss partnership opportunities. You know, business synergies, professional networking. You're clearly going places, and I have connections that could be valuable." He paused, his eyes moving over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Actually, I've been thinking something else too. You and I think we're better suited than you and Emily realise." I felt ice slide down my spine. "Excuse me." "Come on, Vanessa. You're intelligent, successful, financially secure. You have your life together." He stepped closer and I could smell the champagne on his breath. "We could be good together, really good. Think about it, 2 successful professionals, both ambitious, both understanding what it takes to build something real." "You're engaged to my sister," I said flatly. "Emily is sweet," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "She's lovely and fun, but let's be honest, she's a mess. No job, drowning in debt, completely dependent on everyone around her. She has nothing to offer a real partnership." My hand moved to my pocket, making sure the phone was still recording, capturing every damning word. "Whereas you," he continued, reaching out as if to touch my arm, "you're the real deal. Successful career, clearly making excellent money, probably have savings investments. You're the kind of woman a man could actually build a future with." Behind him, I saw movement through the not quite closed door. A figure standing in the hallway, frozen. Emily. Her face was visible through the crack, pale as death, her eyes wide with shock and horror. She'd heard everything. And behind her, drawn by voices or curiosity, stood my mother and Aunt Martha. But Dylan didn't notice. He was too focused on me, on his pitch, on what he thought was a private moment of opportunity. "So what do you say?" he pressed. "Dinner this week, we could talk about this properly, away from family complications. I think you'll find I'm very good at—" The door slammed open, hitting the wall with a crack that made Dylan jump. "What did you just say?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, shaking with the kind of fury that comes from betrayal, so complete it momentarily strips away the ability to shout. Dylan spun around and I watched his face cycle through shock, panic, and then a desperate attempt to recalibrate. "Emily, we were just talking about—" "I heard what you were talking about." Emily's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I heard every word." Emily burst through the door, face pale. "What did you just say?" Dylan turned around, frozen. And the whole family, including my mother, had heard everything. Dylan's face cycled through expressions so quickly, it would have been comical if the situation weren't so devastating. Shock, panic, calculation. I could see him searching for an explanation, a way to spin this, some plausible deniability that would let him escape unscathed. "Emily, sweetheart, you misheard." He reached for her, his voice sliding into that soothing tone I'd heard him use before. "I was joking with Vanessa. Obviously joking. You know I would never—" "Don't." Emily's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare tell me I misheard. I heard you call me a mess. I heard you say I have nothing to offer. I heard you hitting on my sister." "That's not what was happening," Dylan insisted, but his eyes darted toward the door like he was measuring his escape route. "We were having a professional conversation that got misconstrued. Vanessa, tell her—" "No," I said quietly. "I won't tell her anything, except the truth." I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording, and held it up. "Everything you just said is recorded, legally recorded since I was part of the conversation. Would you like me to play it back for everyone?" The blood drained from Dylan's face. Mum had moved into the doorway, now her expression thunderstruck. "What is going on here?" "Dylan was just explaining to me," I said, keeping my voice level, "that he thinks Emily is a mess with nothing to offer, while I'm the kind of woman a man could actually build a future with. His words, not mine." "That's not—" "You're twisting," Dylan sputtered, but Emily cut him off. "Is it true?" she asked, and her voice had gone eerily calm. "Are you in debt?" Dylan froze. "What?" "Vanessa mentioned debt a few weeks ago, and I didn't understand what she meant. But you are, aren't you? You've been lying about your job too." "Emily, every businessman has some debt. That's how you build wealth, through leverage." "How much?" I asked and pulled up Marcus's report on my phone. "Would you like to tell her, or should I?" Dylan's jaw clenched. "You had me investigated." "Answer the question," Emily demanded. When Dylan stayed silent, I answered for him. $95,000. Primarily gambling debts. I swiped through my phone to the photos Marcus had provided. "And you've been unemployed for 6 months, not 3, like you told Emily. You were fired from your last position under circumstances your former employer won't discuss." I held up my phone so Emily could see the photos. Dylan at dinner with a redhead leaning close across candlelight. Dylan leaving a hotel with a brunette, his hand on the small of her back. Both photos time-stamped within the past month. "You've been cheating," Emily whispered, staring at the images. "Those are taken out of context," Dylan tried, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. "There's more," Dad said from the doorway, and I realised he'd been standing there the entire time waiting for his moment. He held up his phone. "Dylan met with me twice in the past months. Both times he asked questions about family assets, property holdings, how the estate would be divided when I pass away." Dad's thumb moved across his screen, and Dylan's voice filled the room from the phone speaker. "I'm just curious about the family structure, you know. If something were to happen to you, God forbid, how does everything work? Would it be split between the daughters equally?" Emily's hand flew to her mouth. The recording continued, Dylan's voice casual and probing. "Does Vanessa have her own assets? I'm just trying to understand the family situation. Emily mentioned something about property holdings." Dad stopped the recording. "In our state, I had every legal right to record those conversations. I was one of the parties involved." "You were researching our family's finances," Emily said slowly, each word dropping like a stone. "You were trying to figure out which one of us had more money." "That's ridiculous," Dylan tried, but his voice had lost all its smooth charm. "I was just making conversation. You hired an investigator to pull property records and asset valuations," I added, showing Emily another document from Marcus's report. 3 weeks ago. You paid someone to research our family." Emily sank into Dad's chair, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Was any of it real? Did you ever actually care about me, or was it always just about money?" Dylan opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. For once, he seemed to have run out of convenient lies. "I cared about you," he finally said, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "But you care about money more," Emily finished for him. "You came to my father's hospital bed when you thought he was dying to ask about inheritance. You've been cheating on me while planning to leave me for my sister if she turned out to be richer. You've been lying about your job, your debts, everything. Emily, get out." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "Get out of my family's house. Get out of my life." "We should talk about this." Dylan tried reaching for her again. "When you're calmer, when we can discuss this rationally, there's nothing to discuss." Emily stood up, and I saw something in her I'd never seen before, a steel core beneath the fragile facade. "You used me. You were going to discard me the moment you found someone better positioned. I heard you. Emily has nothing to offer. Well, guess what? You have even less." Dylan looked around the room at me, at Dad, at Mum, at Aunt Martha, standing silent witness to his exposure. He seemed to finally understand that there was no talking his way out of this no-charm offensive that would work no lie smooth enough to cover the truth. "This is insane," he muttered, straightening his expensive suit jacket. "You people are insane." He walked toward the door, and Mum actually stepped aside to let him pass. Through the doorway, I could see some of my colleagues had noticed the commotion, their conversations trailing off as they watched Dylan stride through the living room toward the front door. Emily stood in the study, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't move toward the door, didn't call after him, didn't chase him the way she'd chased approval and validation her entire life. We heard the front door slam. An engine started in the driveway, tires squealing slightly as Dylan drove away too fast, leaving the wreckage of his manipulations behind him. Dylan left, but Emily didn't follow. This time, she didn't follow. The silence after Dylan's departure felt heavy, oppressive, like the air before a storm finally breaks. Emily stood in the middle of Dad's study, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face in a way that seemed to bypass all her usual careful composure. These weren't the pretty, delicate tears she'd cried at the hospital or at family gatherings. These were ugly, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Mum rushed forward, her maternal instinct apparently overriding her shock. "Oh, honey, come here, sweetheart. It's okay. It's going to be okay." She tried to pull Emily into an embrace, but Emily stood rigid, not accepting the comfort. "We'll get through this," Mum continued, her voice taking on that soothing, problem-solving tone I'd heard my entire life. "That man was clearly not worthy of you. I never really liked him anyway, too slick, too polished. We'll find someone better for you, someone who actually deserves my perfect girl." "Stop." Emily's voice came out raw and broken. "Just stop. Honey, I know you're upset, but stop calling me perfect." Emily's scream was so sudden, so primal, that Mum actually stepped back. "Stop saying that. Stop acting like I'm some kind of flawless trophy you can polish and show off. Emily, sweetheart, you're in shock. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Emily whirled on her, and I saw years of suppressed anguish finally erupting. "Don't you understand? This is your fault. This whole disaster is because of you." Mum's face went pale. "How dare you? You made me think I was perfect. You made me believe that I was special and wonderful, and that everything would just work out for me because I was your golden child." Emily's voice cracked. "But I'm not perfect, Mum. I'm a complete mess, and I don't know how to do anything because you never let me fail, never let me struggle, never let me be anything except your perfect reflection." "I was trying to protect you," Mum said, her voice rising defensively. "I was trying to give you confidence, to make sure you knew you were loved." "You were using me," Emily shouted, and the truth of it seemed to surprise even her. You were living through me because your own mother never made you feel special. So you picked me to be everything you weren't, and you picked Vanessa to be the failure, so I could look better by comparison. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Mum looked like she'd been slapped, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Emily turned to me, and her expression was devastated. Vanessa tried to help me so many times. She gave me advice, helped me with my budget, offered to teach me how to manage my life. And I ignored her because accepting her help would mean admitting I needed it, would mean admitting I wasn't perfect. She sank down into the desk chair, her legs seemingly unable to hold her anymore. I owe $68,000. Between credit cards, personal loans, money I borrowed from Dad that I never told you about. I'm 3 months behind on rent. I got fired this morning for chronic tardiness and poor performance. I'm about to lose my apartment. Mum stood frozen, staring at Emily like she was a stranger. I've been lying to you about everything, Emily continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. About my job, about my finances, about my relationship, about my entire life. Because I couldn't bear to tell you the truth. That your perfect daughter is actually drowning, and has been for years. Why didn't you tell me? Mum finally managed to ask. I'm your mother. I could have helped. How, Mum? Emily looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. How could you help, when the only version of me you know how to love is the perfect one? Every time I called you, you'd tell me how proud you were, how wonderful I was doing, how everything was going great for me. How could I tell you the truth when the truth would destroy the person you needed me to be? She turned to me then, and something in her expression broke my heart more than all her tears. Sis, I'm sorry. You were right all along. About the boundaries, about the enabling, about everything. I didn't want to hear it, because hearing it would mean facing what I'd become. I moved closer, kneeling down beside her chair. I was so cruel to you, she whispered. At Thanksgiving, when Mum humiliated you, I laughed. When you refused to lend me money, I called you selfish. This morning, when I lost my job, I blamed you instead of taking responsibility. And you... Her voice broke. You were the only one actually trying to help me. The only one who loved me enough to tell me the truth instead of the lies I wanted to hear. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I never did. But I made it so easy for you to. Emily wiped at her face with shaking hands. I was so wrapped up in maintaining this image and being Mum's perfect daughter that I didn't even realise I was helping her destroy you. God, Vanessa, I'm so sorry. I glanced at Mum, who stood absolutely still, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For the first time in my memory, she looked genuinely uncertain, stripped of the righteous confidence that had always armoured her. I didn't mean to hurt either of you, Mum said finally, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. I was just trying to fix your own childhood by controlling ours, Aunt Martha said from the doorway, speaking for the first time. My sister, you've spent 35 years trying to heal your wounds by creating 2 daughters who would balance out your own pain. One to be everything you weren't, and one to be the scapegoat you were. And you've damaged them both. Mum's face crumpled, years of denial finally cracking. I never meant, but you did, Emily said, not unkindly, but with absolute clarity. You made Vanessa invisible so I could be seen. You made me dependent so she had to be strong. You pitted us against each other so you could feel like you were finally in control of something. Dad moved to Mum's side, his hand on her shoulder. We've both failed them, he said quietly. I watched it happen and did nothing. That's my shame to carry. My mother sat silent, looking between her 2 daughters, and for the first time she understood what she'd done. Mum stood in the middle of Dad's study like a woman who just watched her entire worldview collapse. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked from Emily still sitting in the chair with tears streaming down her face to me, standing with a composure that came from finally understanding my own worth rather than seeking hers. Aunt Martha's words hung in the air. "You've damaged both your daughters." "I know," Mum whispered, and the admission seemed to cost her everything. "I know I have." She moved to the window, staring out at the backyard where she'd hosted countless family gatherings. Always orchestrating, always controlling, always managing the narrative. When she spoke again, her voice was distant, like she was talking to herself as much as to us. "My mother had 3 daughters," she began quietly. "My older sister, Diane, was beautiful, stunning, really. Everyone said so. She could walk into a room and every head would turn. My younger sister, Patricia, was charming, could make anyone laugh, could talk her way into or out of anything. And then there was me." She touched the window glass with one finger. "The middle daughter, the plain one, the one who was neither beautiful enough nor charming enough to be special." I'd heard pieces of this before from Aunt Martha, but never from Mum herself. "My mother never said I was worthless," she continued, her voice hollow. "She just never said much about me at all. Every achievement was met with a nod. Every struggle was mine to solve alone. At my high school graduation, she spent the entire ceremony taking pictures of Patricia, who was only in 8th grade, but had worn a particularly pretty dress. I was valedictorian, and she missed my speech because she was in the bathroom fixing Patricia's hair. The parallel to my own graduation was so exact, it made my chest ache. When I married your father, I swore I would never make my children feel invisible. I would never make them wonder if they mattered." Mum turned from the window, and I saw tears tracking down her face. "And when Emily was born, this perfect, beautiful baby, I saw my chance. I could give her everything I never had. I could make her feel special, valued, celebrated. I could be the mother my mother never was." "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "Where did I fit in that plan?" Mum's face crumpled. "You were so capable, Vanessa. Even as a little girl, you were independent and strong, and you just handled things. You didn't seem to need me the way Emily did. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that was okay. That you being strong meant I could focus on Emily being loved. But you made me strong," I said, and I heard my voice shake with suppressed emotion. "You didn't discover that I was capable and independent. You created it by giving me no other choice. I had to be strong because she was allowed to be weak. I had to be invisible because she needed to be seen. You didn't just neglect to make me feel special. You actively used me as a contrast to make her shine brighter." "I didn't see it that way," Mom said weakly. "But that's what happened," Emily said from her chair, her voice raw. "You put everything on Vanessa so I wouldn't have to carry anything. And now she's the strong one, and I'm the one who can't even manage basic adult responsibilities." Aunt Martha moved further into the room, her expression stern, but not unkind. "My sister, do you understand what you've done? You took your pain, the pain of being overlooked and undervalued, and you split it between your daughters instead of healing it in yourself. You gave Emily the love you never received, but in doing so, you gave Vanessa the neglect you experienced. You tried to fix your childhood by damaging theirs." Mum sank down onto the arm of the sofa, her legs seeming unable to hold her anymore. "I thought I was protecting them. I thought I was being a better mother than mine was." "You were being a different kind of bad mother," Aunt Martha said bluntly. "Not the same kind, but just as damaging." "I was afraid," Mum admitted, and her voice broke on the words. "I was so afraid that if Vanessa became too successful, too independent, too complete without needing me, she would leave and never look back. That I would lose her entirely because I'd never given her a reason to stay."
Shumage?
The confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from my mother. "So you kept her small," Dad said quietly from where he stood near the door. You diminished her achievements, so she'd keep seeking your approval. You made her doubt her worth, so she'd keep coming back, hoping to finally earn your love. And it almost worked, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I spent 35 years trying to earn something you were never planning to give me. Trying to be good enough, successful enough, helpful enough to finally be seen. Mum looked up at me, mascara streaked down her face, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Then, in a movement that shocked everyone in the room, she slid off the sofa arm and onto her knees in front of me. Vanessa. Her voice was choked with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stared down at my mother kneeling before me, this woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small now, making herself smaller. It felt surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. I was wrong, she continued, her hands clasped in front of her like a supplicant. I was wrong about everything. Wrong to pit you against Emily. Wrong to dismiss your achievements. Wrong to make you feel invisible while I showered her with attention. Wrong to tell you that you ruined this family when the truth is... Her voice broke completely. The truth is, you've been holding this family together while I was tearing it apart. Mum, I started, but she shook her head. No, let me finish. Please. She took a shuddering breath. At Thanksgiving, when I said those things in front of everyone, I saw something in your face. Not hurt the way I expected, but something else. Like you'd finally stopped hoping I would change. And it terrified me. Because I knew that I was losing you. That I'd already lost you, really. And it was my own fault. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it, feeling the tremor in her fingers. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I was wrong and I'm sorry. And if you give me the chance, if you're willing, I want to try to be the mother you deserved all along. I looked at her kneeling there, this woman who had shaped so much of my pain, finally taking responsibility for it. Part of me wanted to pull away to let her feel the rejection she'd made me feel for decades. Part of me wanted to accept her apology immediately, to fall into the maternal love I'd craved my whole life. But I'd learnt something in the past 2 weeks. I'd learned that real love doesn't manipulate or diminish. Real love doesn't require you to be less so someone else can be more. Real love doesn't apologize with words while repeating the same patterns with actions. I looked at my mother, the woman who'd hurt me for 35 years, and I had to decide forgive or walk away. Before I could answer, before I could even begin to formulate what forgiveness might look like or whether I was ready to offer it, my father cleared his throat. The sound was quiet, but somehow commanded attention in a way Dad rarely did. We all turned to look at him. He stood straighter than I'd seen him stand in years, and I realised with a start that he no longer looked frail or diminished. The man who'd supposedly collapsed just days ago, who'd spent months appearing progressively weaker, now stood with the bearing of someone who'd been carrying a great weight and had finally decided to set it down. I have something to say. He began, his voice steady and clear. And I need everyone to hear this, especially my daughters. Mum started to rise from her knees, but Dad shook his head slightly and she stayed where she was, looking up at him with an expression caught between hope and fear. I was wrong, Dad said, and the simple declaration carried more weight than any elaborate explanation could have. For 35 years I watched what was happening in this family, and I did nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, maintaining harmony, avoiding conflict, but the truth is, I was a coward. Robert, Mum started, but he held up a hand. No, let me finish. I've been silent too long. He looked at me, and I saw regret etched deep in the lines of his face. Vanessa, I should have protected you. From the very first time your mother dismissed your achievements to praise Emily's, I should have stepped in. When you came home with your honour roll certificate, and your mother was too busy planning Emily's birthday party to notice I should have made her stop and see you. When you graduated college with honours, and she missed it because she was photographing your sister, I should have said something, anything. His voice grew thicker with emotion. But I didn't. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, that you didn't need me to fight your battles. But that was just an excuse for my own inaction. You shouldn't have had to be that strong. You were a child who needed her father to stand up for her, and I failed you. Dad, I tried, but he shook his head. I'm not finished. He turned to Emily, who looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. And Emily, I failed you too. I let your mother turn you into something fragile and dependent because it was easier than confronting her about what she was doing. I've been giving you money for years, enabling your financial irresponsibility, because I couldn't bear to see you struggle. But in doing so, I robbed you of the chance to develop the strength you needed. Emily's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling over. You need to learn to stand on your own feet. Dad continued, his voice firm but not unkind. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you enough to want you to be capable of surviving without someone constantly rescuing you. The $47,000 you owe me, I'm forgiving that debt. All of it. Emily gasped, "Oh, God. Dad, but..." He continued, I won't give you another cent until you've proven you can manage what you have. No more bailouts, no more covering your rent or your credit cards or your car payments. You're going to learn to budget, to work, to make hard choices and live with the consequences. Because that's what adults do, and it's time you became one. He looked between both of us, his daughters, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before, a kind of fierce, protective love that had finally found its voice. I'm changing my estate plans, he announced, and I felt the room's attention sharpen. Everything will be divided equally between you two. The house, the investments, everything. But not now, and not when I die. You'll receive your inheritance when you've both demonstrated you can stand on your own without it. Robert, we should discuss this, Mum started, but Dad's look silenced her. For Vanessa, that bar is already met. You've built a career, managed your finances responsibly, created a life that doesn't depend on anyone's approval or support. For Emily, the requirement is that you maintain steady employment for 1 full year, reduce your debt by at least 50% through your own efforts, and demonstrate consistent financial responsibility. Only then will the inheritance be released. Emily nodded slowly, and I saw something like relief in her expression, as if she'd been waiting for someone to finally give her expectations she could meet instead of perfection she could only fake. Dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, walking over to hand it to me. This is separate from the inheritance. This is something I set up 6 months ago after watching you help that young woman at your company navigate a hostile work environment. I saw how you mentored her, how you gave her strategies to stand up for herself, and I realised you've been doing that your whole life, helping people find their strength when they've been told they have none. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The paper was expensive, official looking, with an attorney's office embossed in the corner. Open it, he said softly. I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. The first page was a legal document, dense with official language, that took me a moment to pass. Then I saw the header, Establishment of the Rising Daughters Foundation. Below that, a mission statement that made my throat tight. To provide educational scholarships, financial literacy training and mentorship to young women who have been overlooked, undervalued, or made invisible by family dynamics that favour others. The second page showed a bank statement. The foundation's initial endowment, $100,000. Dad, I could barely get the word out past the lump in my throat. You've spent your whole life helping people quietly, without recognition, without expecting anything in return, he said. I wanted to give you the means to do it on a larger scale. The foundation is in your name, but the mission is yours to define. Use it however you see fit to help girls and women who've been where you've been. I stared at the documents at the bank statement showing a sum of money that could change lives at the legal framework that would allow me to formalise all the informal mentoring and supporting I'd been doing for years. Dad had done this, had seen me, really seen me, and had created something that honoured not just what I'd accomplished, but who I was at my core. How long have you been planning this? I asked. 6 months for the foundation. But I've been watching you your whole life, sweetheart, waiting for you to see your own worth. And when I realised you finally did, when you hung up on your mother for the first time, when you set boundaries with Emily, when you stopped seeking approval you'd never get, I knew it was time. He glanced at Mum, still kneeling on the floor. This family is broken. We all know it now. But broken things can be repaired if everyone is willing to do the work. Real work, not just apologies and promises. Changed behaviour, not changed words. I looked down at my mother, who was watching me with desperate hope in her eyes. I looked at Emily, who'd finally stopped crying and was sitting up straighter, as if Dad's challenge had given her something to aim for. I looked at Aunt Martha, who nodded slightly, encouraging me to take my time. And I looked at the documents in my hands, proof that I'd been seen, valued and believed in, even when I thought I was invisible. I opened the envelope, £100, thousands and legal paperwork for the fund. Dad had been preparing this for a long time. I stood there holding the foundation documents, looking down at my mother still kneeling on the floor, her eyes pleading for forgiveness I wasn't sure I was ready to give. The old me, the Vanessa from 2 weeks ago, would have rushed to help her up, would have said, "It's okay," even when it wasn't, would have smoothed over the discomfort to keep the peace. But I wasn't that Vanessa anymore. "Get up, Mum," I said quietly. "Please." She rose, slowly, unsteadily, and I saw how much that apology had cost her. Good, I thought, and then felt guilty for thinking it. But maybe she needed to understand that pain, the pain of being vulnerable, of admitting fault, of not knowing if you'd be accepted or rejected. "I hear your apology," I said carefully, "and I believe you mean it, at least in this moment. But words are easy, Mum. Patterns are hard to break. If you really want to repair our relationship, it's going to take more than one apology. It's going to take consistent change over a long period of time." "I'll do it," she said quickly. "Whatever it takes." "Then start with therapy," I interrupted. "Real therapy with a professional who can help you understand why you did what you did and how to be different. Not for me, for yourself. Because I can't have a relationship with someone who's going to repeat the same patterns every time things get difficult." Mum nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I will. I promise." "We'll see," I said, and I didn't try to make it sound less harsh. She needed to understand that forgiveness wasn't automatic, that she'd have to earn back what she'd broken. I looked at Emily, who was watching me with red-rimmed eyes. "And you have a lot of work to do. But I meant what I said before. If you want real help, not just a bailout, I'm here." "I want it," Emily said, her voice small but certain. "The real help. I'm done pretending." That conversation happened 6 months ago. 6 months that have transformed all of our lives in ways I couldn't have imagined that Sunday afternoon. The $50 million infrastructure project I was managing. It concluded 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 15% under budget. My company promoted me again this time to Vice President of Strategic Operations. But more importantly than the title or the salary increase, I wake up every morning knowing I earned every bit of it through my own merit, my own work, my own competence. The Rising Daughters Foundation officially launched 3 months ago. We've already provided scholarships to 12 young women, all of them navigating family dynamics where they've been overlooked, undervalued, or made to feel invisible. Last week, a 25-year-old named Jessica came to my office, our small but professional space, in a building downtown that I chose specifically because it felt welcoming rather than intimidating. She sat across from my desk, twisting her hands in her lap, and told me a story I knew by heart, the younger sibling who could do no wrong, the parents who never quite saw her achievements, the lifetime of wondering why she wasn't enough. I understand how you feel, I told her, and I meant it with every fibre of my being. And I'm going to help you. We spent 2 hours that day going over her options scholarships. She qualified for financial literacy resources, strategies for setting boundaries with her family. When she left, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for seeing me." I thought about that phrase for a long time after she left. Thank you for seeing me. Such a simple thing, being seen. And yet it's what I'd craved my entire life. Emily found a new job 6 weeks after that terrible Sunday. It's at a smaller company with a salary that's 30% less than what she was making before, but she shows up on time every day. She started therapy the week after Dylan left, working with a counsellor who specialises in codependency and family systems. It's hard work, she calls me sometimes, crying about things her therapist has helped her realise about herself. But she's doing it. We have dinner together once a month now, just the two of us. It's still awkward sometimes, still complicated by years of being pitted against each other. But we're building something new, something based on mutual respect rather than obligation or competition. Last month, she showed me her debt reduction spreadsheet. She's paid off $8,000 in 6 months, all through her own budgeting and discipline. I was genuinely proud of her. Mum went to therapy like she promised, not just for a few sessions to say she did it, but consistently every week. She still calls too often, still has moments where she slips into old patterns of favoritism or manipulation. But when I point it out, she apologises and corrects it instead of getting defensive. It's progress, slow and imperfect, but real. The extended family found out what happened. Aunt Martha made sure of it. At the summer family reunion, Mum had to face relatives who'd witnessed years of her treatment of me, and she publicly acknowledged what she'd done. She apologised in front of everyone, cousins, aunts, uncles, and admitted she'd failed me as a mother. It was uncomfortable and painful and absolutely necessary. Dylan. We heard through mutual acquaintances that Emily's report to financial authorities about his fraudulent activities led to a broader investigation. He was arrested 4 months ago for running investment scams, targeting women he met through dating apps. He's awaiting trial, facing up to 10 years. I'd like to say I felt satisfaction hearing that news, but mostly I just felt tired. He was a predator who'd probably ruined other lives before trying to ruin ours. I see Dad every Tuesday for dinner, just the two of us at a quiet restaurant where we can talk without interruption. Sometimes we discuss work, sometimes families, sometimes just sports or books or nothing important. But what matters is that he shows up consistently, reliably, proving that he meant what he said about standing with me. Last Tuesday, we took a walk in the park after dinner, the same park where I used to play as a child, while Mum fussed over Emily. "I'm proud of you," Dad said, his hand gentle on my shoulder, "not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become." "I know, Dad," I replied, and I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. This time, I truly know. People ask me sometimes if I regret standing up to my family that day, if I regret the confrontation, the revelations, the painful honesty that tore apart the careful facade we'd all been maintaining. I tell them no, because I wasn't fighting against my family, I was standing up for myself. There's a difference. My mother is still learning how to love properly, how to see her daughters as separate people rather than reflections of her own trauma. Emily is learning independence, discovering that she's capable of more than anyone, including herself, believed. And I learned something crucial. Love doesn't mean enduring abuse. Love doesn't require you to make yourself small so someone else can feel big. Love doesn't demand you sacrifice your worth on the altar of keeping peace. Dad told me I'd reclaimed my place and dignity, but the truth is, I didn't reclaim anything. I created it. I created my own worth, my own value, my own sense of self that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. And now, through the Rising Daughters Foundation, I help other women do the same. This morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment The same apartment where I'd once sat reading Dad's letter at 2 a.m, where I'd hung up on my mother for the first time, where I'd made the decision to stop seeking approval I'd never get. The woman looking back at me was different now. Stronger, yes, but also softer, in some ways softer because strength no longer required armor, because I could be vulnerable without fearing it would be used against me. Sometimes loving yourself means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means walking away from people who can't love you the way you deserve. Sometimes it means forgiving, and sometimes it means not forgiving, and both can be acts of self-respect. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. And I learned that the family you build, the relationships you choose, the love you create for yourself, those matter just as much as the family you're born into. Maybe more. So that's my story. That's how I went from being the invisible daughter at a Thanksgiving dinner where my mother publicly humiliated me to becoming the woman who built her own foundation and reclaimed her dignity. Not through revenge, not through cruelty, but through truth, boundaries, and the courage to finally stand up for myself. I want to take a moment to talk to those of you watching this video right now, because I know some of you see yourselves in my story. I know because you've been leaving comments, sending messages, sharing your own experiences of being overlooked, undervalued, or made to feel invisible in your own families. And I want you to know that I see you. Your pain is valid, your feelings are real, and you deserve better. To the daughters who've spent decades trying to earn love that was always conditional, I want you to know that it's not your fault. You didn't fail to be good enough. They failed to see your worth. And there's a profound difference between those two things. To the siblings who've watched a brother or sister receive all the attention, all the praise, all the resources while you struggled in silence, I understand. It's not just about jealousy, it's about wanting to matter, about wanting someone to notice when you accomplished something, when you needed help, when you were hurting. To the parents who are watching this and recognizing uncomfortable truths about your own behavior, it's never too late to change. My mother is proof of that. She's been in therapy for 6 months now, doing the hard work of understanding why she did what she did. Change is possible, but it requires more than words. It requires consistent action, genuine accountability, and the humility to admit when you've caused harm. Some of you have been asking whether I really forgave my mother. The answer is complicated. Forgiveness isn't a single moment or a simple yes or no. It's a process. Some days I feel compassionate toward her, understanding that she was acting out of her own pain. Other days I'm still angry about the decades I lost trying to earn love I should have been given freely. Both of those feelings can be true at the same time. What I can tell you is this: I no longer hate her. I no longer need her approval to feel valuable. I no longer wait for her to finally see me the way I wanted to be seen. I've created my own validation, my own worth, my own sense of self that doesn't depend on her at all. And that freedom, that's more valuable than any apology could ever be. Now I want to address something several of you have brought up. Some of you think I was too harsh with my mother and sister. Some think I should have cut them off entirely. Some of you relate to Emily more than to me, seeing yourselves as the favoured child who was damaged by that favouritism. And some see yourselves in my mother, recognising patterns in your own parenting that scare you. All of those perspectives are valid. Family dynamics are complex, and there's rarely a simple right or wrong answer. What worked for me might not work for you, and that's okay. But what I hope you take away from this story is that you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to demand respect. You have the right to walk away from relationships that harm you, even if those relationships are with family members. Blood relation doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you, diminish you, or use you as an emotional punching bag. And if you're the Emily in your family story, if you're the one who was favoured and is now realising how that favouritism damaged you, please know that you can choose differently. You can learn the skills you were never taught. You can develop independence, even if you weren't raised to be independent. You can apologize to the siblings you were pitted against and work to build genuine relationships. My sister is doing that work right now, and I'm proud of her for it. I created the Rising Daughters Foundation because I know I'm not the only one who went through this. I know there are thousands, maybe millions of women out there who've been made to feel invisible, who've spent years trying to earn love that should have been given freely. If that's you, I want you to know that resources exist. Therapy can help, support groups can help, and sometimes just knowing you're not alone can help. Something happened yesterday that brought everything full circle. I was having dinner with my father, and a woman approached our table. She was in her 60s, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said, "I've been following your story online. I have 2 daughters, and I realised I've been doing to them exactly what your mother did to you. I've been favouring one and overlooking the other without realising it. Your story made me see it, and I'm going to change." I gave her the name of a good family therapist, and I realised that's why I'm sharing this publicly, even though it's painful and personal. Because if my story helps one parent see what they're doing before it's too late, if it helps one overlooked daughter realise she deserves better, if it helps one favoured child understand the cage they're trapped in, then all of this was worth it. So here's what I want you to do. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in any part of it, hit that subscribe button right now. Because I'm going to keep sharing stories like this. Stories about setting boundaries, about standing up for yourself, about breaking generational patterns of dysfunction. Stories about real families dealing with real problems and finding their way toward healing. And I need you to leave a comment telling me your story. You don't have to share details if you're not comfortable, but tell me something. Tell me if you're the overlooked child or the favoured one. Tell me if you're the parent trying to do better. Tell me if you've set boundaries or if you're still trying to find the courage. Tell me what part of this story hit closest to home. Your comments create a community. They help other people realise they're not alone. They start conversations that can lead to healing. So please share your experience. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been made to feel invisible, or someone who's struggling with toxic family dynamics, share this video with them. And if you're sitting there thinking, but I can't stand up to my family, I'm not strong enough, I want you to know something. I wasn't strong or brave either. I was terrified. I cried. I doubted myself. I almost backed down 100 times. But I did it anyway, and so can you. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. It's about knowing your worth even when everyone around you is trying to convince you you're worthless. It's about choosing yourself even when you've been taught to your whole life that choosing yourself is selfish. So, subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like this. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. And, most importantly, leave a comment sharing your own experience. Let's build a community of people who understand, who've been there, who are doing the work of healing and choosing themselves. Because you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to take up space in this world without apologizing for it. And if no one in your family has ever told you they're proud of you, let me be the first. I'm proud of you for being here, for listening, for considering that maybe you deserve better. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Now go subscribe, leave that comment, and let's continue this conversation together.